'Cause I'm yours to keep if you want to.
Cool. Alrighty, sir.
Let's do it.
Thank you very much for coming through to do this with me, man.
Are you crazy, man? Thank you for having me.
Let's just jump right into it and go with, what is your full name?
My full name is Ivan Evidente.
Are you named after anybody?
No, but I will say that my mom has I don't know, she has this infatuation with Russian culture.
Okay.
So my name, I guess, would be properly pronounced like Ivan, and my sister's name is Tanya, so they're like Russian names, right?
Right.
So that's the only real tie I have, you know what I mean? And then, funny enough, I actually took a Russian course on how to speak Russian.
Nice.
Yeah, like, I mean, if you asked me anything, I probably couldn't say, I could say the basics, but yeah, so
That's a complicated language.
it is. It's actually, it's funny enough because I also studied German, and I thought that German was a very difficult language because they just have so many different types of like the grammar is different,
Yeah.
but Russian is as well. But I can say that I think I could read Russian still. So that's it. And I can write my name in Russian.
Nice. Where were you born?
I was born in Toronto, Canada.
No way.
Yes, sir.
Awesome. So you're just native, grew up there.
That's it. Born
was-
and raised, still there.
What was it like when you were growing up there?
Growing up in Toronto, it was great. I mean, look, I think and you probably may have heard this, it's a very multicultural city.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like it's been like that
Cool.
from the day I was born. You know what I mean? So it's great. I mean, it's cold even in the winters, but I will also say that Toronto is definitely not the coldest city in Canada.
Yeah.
But it's a great city, and it's a city that continues to grow, continues to develop, and it's an amazing city.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What kind of stuff did you do when you were just like younger growing up there?
When I was growing up, I think, and this is like in the early 80s, I think like for any kid that was a kid of the 80s, just like, just the regular stuff, you know what I mean? It's not like how it was today with kids. It was like, there's two sticks and go figure it out
Yeah.
there. And like, I mean, the closest is like a BMX bike and,
Yeah.
and a skateboard, you know
Sure.
what I mean? But I think at that time too, I think I was like into breakdancing, you know what I mean? So it was like in the early 80s. So that's kind of like my introduction to a lot of the music stuff, you know what I
Sick.
mean? And just hip hop in general.
Did you have any family that was big on music, like siblings or parents that were?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, my mother is a pianist.
Cool.
And she still is to this day, but my mother plays pianos for like ballet and modern dance, and so she still does it to this day. So she works for the ballet company back in Toronto and modern dance companies. So I've been
Sick.
sort of surrounded by it. And then my sister is now a retired professional she was a professional ballerina.
No way.
Yeah, so her and my mom worked in that business. So my sister's retired now, but now my sister is now a prof. She runs the dance faculty at one of the universities in Toronto.
Cool.
Yeah, so it's kind of been I've been surrounded around music to some, or art at least for that matter.
Sure. Mm-hmm. What kind of stuff did you grow up with being played in like your house?
In terms of music,
Yeah.
I'd say a lot of jazz music for sure. My mom is also, even though my mom is classically trained, I found that there was a lot of jazz music. But my mom was just a big fan of just great. You'd hear a lot of Motown music in the house too, and but I would say jazz predominantly, and classical of course. But that's like my mom was just like, oh, that's just because that's what we would listen to, having to train and as a pianist. But she's a big jazz head, so
Cool.
that's kind of sort of like something that I've kind of grew into as well. So
Nice.
yeah.
What kind of, like, were you playing sports? Or you playing video games?
The worst.
Always?
No, I
Okay.
was never a sports person. I was the guy who probably held the towels for the, they throw the towels on the guy, like, hold that, right? I think it was a height thing, and I was just never, like, and to this day, I'm not the biggest sports fan. I could
Sure.
appreciate it. But no, I was just not inclined in sports at all. Like, I'm, like, saying, like, at all.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Do you follow or enjoy anything, like, just from a watching standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like, it's funny because my girl's a big Raptors fan, so I feel like I'm a poser who just kind of like, she knows way more about sports than I do, and I'm just like, yeah, let's do it, go Raps, you know what I mean? But I definitely follow the Raptors. I think basketball, I'd say,
Yeah.
for the most part, but yeah, I would be lying if I could give you stats and all this. No,
Sure.
just don't. You know what I mean?
I mean, even from like 80s and being a kid and stuff like that.
But what I will say is that I was big into skateboarding.
Okay.
Like the Powell
Sick.
Peralta days, like
Cool.
that was my shit. You
Cool.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Mhm. And I yeah, I think if anything, I was into skateboarding. You know
Cool.
what I mean? And I thought I thought I was pretty good personally, but you know, then you get the injuries here and there, and you're like, okay,
Yeah.
maybe not as good as I thought.
Yeah, it was kind of the same for me, like growing up in snowboarding.
Yeah.
You know, and like I grew up in Park City, which is like a breeding ground for like professional athletes, Olympic
course.
athletes, and
Yeah.
like tried to do like snowboard team stuff. My friends were like way better than I was, and I was always like, I don't think I could see myself doing this professionally. Same thing, like I broke my wrist, I broke some ribs. I was like, nah, I'm kind of good on doing this from here. You know, like I'm just gonna enjoy this.
Yeah.
But I could never. I feel like 2 left feet skateboarding. Like I couldn't drop into like a 3-foot ramp. I would just eat shit, and I was just like, man, what is going on? Like
Which way did you ride?
regular.
Okay, so that was goofy, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
but you know what's funny, because back in the days, you know, when they used to, like, when all the old like early like skate videos came out, like, you know, they would get bootleg, like the Power
Yeah.
Peralta videos.
Yeah.
Right? I remember seeing like the early snowboard videos too that would come out, and that was like a whole thing back then.
Yeah,
so
dude.
to see what it's become now, it's insane, right?
Yeah.
It's crazy how,
sure.
you know what I mean? That's just an entire industry that never left. You know what I mean?
That was my vehicle for discovering music.
Yeah.
So like when I was in probably like junior high school, like 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, like I started connecting with like my core group of friends that I still talk to like a few times a week from junior high school. And we would just like, somebody would buy or download a new snowboarding movie. We'd all like meet at my place,
Yeah.
watch that shit. They'd be playing like the most interesting music because they were traveling all over the world. They were athletes from all over the world. So it's like, oh, this guy's got music from somewhere in Europe, and this guy's got some crazy Japanese punk. And you're just like, I would never hear this otherwise, you know?
I remember watching videos of like Mike Vallely back in the day, and there would be like his, and I guess they never like cleared these songs on these videos back in the day, but
Oh,
it
I'm
would
sure.
be like, you would hear like anything from like Run DMC, like songs playing in the background, to like Suicidal Tendencies, you know what I mean? So it's like, you're right. It's so you'd hear different kind of stuff. So, you know, it teaches you to appreciate that as well, just different genres. So I'm all for it, man.
Yeah, no, it was great. I mean, for me, like I also really didn't have radio. Like,
Right.
like Park City was tucked up in the mountains. Salt Lake didn't really have like great radio. Like that's such a cultural staple to LA. I don't know. I'm assuming probably Toronto, like you
No,
guys
well,
probably
funny
had.
enough, they're to this day they're actually the sort of hip hop format
Okay.
on radio does not exist in Canada.
No way,
We do
still?
have like one station that, you know, and I feel like everybody Canadian knows about this or talks about this, but like urban radio, let's call it, as the format, doesn't exist in Canada.
That's
So,
insane.
Yeah, I mean, it's top 40, and then, you know what I mean? And so you'll have certain records that you'll hear on there. But in terms of like the actual, like a hip hop R&B station, I think there's Flow 98.7, which is, you know, obviously a staple in our country, but it's just in Toronto, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like you drive a few hours out and the frequency's done. Like you're not even gonna get it.
For sure.
Exactly. So it's so similar to your story. It's not like what we did though have was college radio. So mix show and college radio, which I think it's funny because that's what we were hearing a lot of the music that was coming, you know, like that we would hear. Hip hop music at least was all being played on these mix shows on college radio.
Sure.
You know? So that was big, especially in the 90s in Toronto. That's literally where we would hear everything. Right? Like the early 80s to that sort of 90s golden era, they call it.
Yeah.
That's how we would find it. You know what I mean? And there was like 3 college stations that were really known for that. That's 88.1 CKLN, CHRY 105.5, and CIUT 89.5, right? And fortunately, those stations, like, you know, they're not what they used to be, but those were staples in our city. And you're only getting those like on Saturdays or like a 1 day a week from a time slot, you know, 1 to 4. So you're like, we'd be at like the tape deck,
Ready
press
to record, whatever.
exactly, right? But it's like, it's kind of like what built the city in the same way. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, that's how we found that, and that's what was so special about it, especially in Toronto. So,
I want to keep on this path, but I also want to go back to like school for you as a young kid. Were you into school?
I don't know if I'd say I mean, I didn't per se hate school.
Okay.
I don't think I was considered a terrible, horrible student.
Yeah.
I think I was like, you know, 70 average
Sure.
type of student. I was very fortunate. You know, my parents are immigrants, and we grew up as many immigrants back in Canada, or specifically in Toronto, like government housing. But my mom and my father were determined to, send my sister and I to great schools. Education was a big thing for them, and I was fortunate enough to go to a private French school. Where I'm bilingual. I speak French fluently.
Sick.
Yeah,
I didn't know.
I
would
mean,
assume, obviously, with the Canadian history, but
right. But you know what? And I mean, not like I practice French every day, but I was fortunate enough to do that. And then my sister was, again, fortunate enough to go to ballet school. You know what I mean? So I think my parents kind of spent their every last dollar they had
on you guys,
on us, right?
Yeah.
So, it paid off in that sense, especially I think, having that, the ability to speak two languages, especially French in Canada. I think it served me well, you know what I mean? Yeah, so school was kind of like interesting, but it was funny for me because I went to this private school. And I said, like, we lived in like government housing, so we were never. But I was sort of surrounded by these, kids who came from these like wealthy homes, but I didn't really think of it like that. You know what I mean? They were just super normal for me. You don't really think of that when you're. But then, like in hindsight, you look at it like, damn, I do remember kids getting dropped off in Porsches and stuff, or wow, or in BMWs, like, and here I am, we're just, regular folk kind of thing, so to say. But it taught me a lot. And I think by the time I was in like the 11th grade, I was like, okay, I think I want to experience what like public schooling's like, you know what I mean? Which my parents were fine with. I think they were like, okay, like we put them in this sort of private school situation for a while, and it was actually really fun for me even to just experience the public schools, because there's a lot more students now.
Sure.
And just to be honest, some of the courses were a lot easier for me because it's like you kind of get, you know what I mean? So, but it was fun, man. So yeah, but school to me was just like, I've always been a kind of like a social type of person. So meeting just different people, and especially going to the private school, I met people from different parts of the world, even foreign students. And, when you get that experience at an early age, it's kind of interesting, right? It kind of, it just teaches you a lot about culture in general.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
I got to go to boarding school in Switzerland for a year in high school.
Yeah.
And same thing. Like I met people. My roommate was Mexican. Like in my little kind of like small dorm house, it was like, probably people from 10, 15 different countries.
Right.
Like it just, and then within the school, you have people from all over the world. So same thing. Like I got exposed to that super early.
Yeah.
Because I grew up in like a place that was like 7,000 people year round.
Wow.
Like Park City, when I was growing up in the 90s, was fucking small.
Yeah,
like before the Olympics in 2002, which kind of like reintroduced that like Salt Lake City and that area to the world, and they invested a lot of money to support the Olympics coming in. It was just like a small ski town.
Got it. Yeah.
So
what's the population there now?
Honestly, I don't know. It's grown exponentially. Like it's the population there well exceeds the infrastructure.
Okay.
It's like terrible now. Just especially with COVID was like the next leg of like, holy shit.
Yeah.
So many people are moving to the mountains, getting out of the like major cities. The price point of like real estate there went like 10x. I mean, there's people moving there with like $20 to $50 million houses now. Like that was never what that atmosphere was like at the time. But yeah, it was interesting to have that exposure too, and I also fortunately got to grow up traveling a lot. So that was another way to just take in like, oh man, this is how this goes over here. And this is how these people are, and, culturally what they're doing. And
traveling is definitely a privilege, I say, you know what I mean? It's like, if you get that opportunity to be, or blessed enough to be able to even travel, it's like, I highly encourage people to see the world, man.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Did you get to travel a lot growing up, or?
Well, funny enough, not too much, but my mom, as in the business that I was saying, she was a pianist. My mom definitely traveled, which to me was like interesting, because it was kind of like, I kind of compared it to like later in my life. I compared it to, she was like, it was almost like a DJ. Like she would travel around to these places and play, because I guess she was, she was good at what she did, that she would be, invited to play for these different ballet companies or around the world. And so she's been in, you think about it, it's like, you must have some sort of special skill that they're bringing you out there versus just hiring somebody in that city, just like how it works, right? Like almost. And so because, we were still young, there was times that we would be able to go with her. So like, I remember going to places like Cuba, like in the 80s, like my mom was working for the ballet out there. Like I remember going to New York at a very young age because my mom was working with like the ballet out there, or places in Canada, like in Banff, Alberta. Like my mom used to work every summer in Banff at the Banff Center of the Arts, which is like a program that they do every summer, and it's beautiful over there as well. So like,
Man, that's one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. My
yeah,
entire
right.
life.
So like seeing that is kind of like interesting. So being able, so it wasn't like we traveled all the time, because there were times that like my mom would be traveling, or my dad would have to sort of take care of us back home. But I would definitely say we were fortunate enough to kind of get some of those perks, you know what I mean? But my mom, I really got to give it up to her, because she's traveled a lot, like especially Europe. She loves Europe, and so she's been everywhere from Copenhagen to like all over across Europe, but like actually working. You know what I mean? I'm like, damn, that's pretty cool.
That's amazing, dude. That's so cool.
Yeah, she's I'm Filipino background, right? And most Filipino moms, I would just always say that my mom is very like, it's not like the typical Filipino mom. She's just more like, because she's an artist ultimately. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of that sort of rubbed off on me, and that sort of helped me find my career path eventually. Right?
That's amazing, dude.
Thank
so
you.
cool.
Yeah, it's awesome, man.
Let's jump back to what your first job was.
My first official job. My first job. Well, I mean, the first job I had was, I guess a lot of people had, like, the standard newspaper route.
Yeah.
So that was one. But I think the first official job where like I filled out an application, I worked at a grocery store bagging groceries. The place was called Bruno's Fine Foods, which is still to this day around.
No way.
Funny enough, I got to shout out my man Jay Longo, because he's a producer who I met like last year randomly at this production camp that we went to. It turns out that he worked there too, right?
No
it was
way.
so crazy. I'm like, what? And then him and I bonded on it. But so that was one of my first jobs. But I am also going to say that, and I don't really consider it wasn't a job, but when I was like in grade like 5 or 6, one of my best friends at the time, his father was like this kind of like a hustler kind of guy. Like we didn't really know what he was, but back in the day he would, there was a popular, to this day, there's a popular parade event that's called Caravana.
Yeah, I was there for it last summer.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So in the early 80s, my friend's father would make these like print up shirts that would be like Caravana shirts, but selling it out the trunk.
Sure.
And so he would like get us as these young kids to sell them on the street for him. So it was kind of like taught us our first sort of like, hey, like sell these things for like $10, and for every one you sell, you get like 2. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But so that sort of was a little bit of experience. But then my first official job was this grocery store. But the one I have to honestly say was like the job that I felt like, oh, I worked at the Olive Garden.
Okay.
Yeah, for a while.
I want to circle back to that, but because you mentioned Caravana, I'm curious to know, what was that like in like the 80s, and how does it what's like the lifeline of that from like the 80s to now as you've experienced it?
I think it depends on who you ask, right?
Totally.
You know what I mean? Because I mean, listen, for it to be like what it is to this day, it is like, it has attracted people from all over the world, even back then. But I think some of my fondest memories would have been like the 90s, was just that era of just like, we had a very, very, this is when the club scene was quite like really growing in Toronto. And if you ask anybody who has experienced Caravana in the 90s, it was known for, especially like, because so Caravana it falls on a long weekend.
Right.
It always falls like the Monday is a holiday in Toronto. I don't even know what the actual, I should know this, but it falls on a long weekend. So what would happen is, from like Thursday night on is like where the parties start. But Friday night, so we have a very, it's almost a popular street, very well-known street called Yonge Street.
Yep.
Right. So from Yonge Street, like the main area, Yonge and Dundas, every Friday night was like a parking lot. So people are just parked on the streets, partying, like just on the streets. And like a lot of Americans would come into town. So it's like even intensified even more.
Sure.
So it was known, but it was also known for just a lot of like crazy shit would go down. Like it was normal for like, oh, gunshots, run, you know what I mean? But like, that's just what it was. Right. But it was like that Friday night is kind of like the night that sets off the weekend.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And it's literally because the parade actually happens on the Saturday. So everyone would be hanging out on the streets there. And it was just like a really great time. And so Caravana weekend to this, I think it's a very different time now, because just even there's not as many clubs in general, but it was like there's just incredible parties, incredible events, and of course the parade itself, right?
Yeah.
It attracts like 1 million people plus every year. And
that was insane.
yeah, and then on top of that, it's just kind of like, we obviously, like I said, it's a very multicultural country. We have a very big population from the islands or from the Caribbean, you know what I mean, and in Toronto specifically. So you're getting like the real deal out there, in terms of the experience, and not to mention just other different cultures or different, people from different other cities that are coming in. So it's like, it was just a massive party on the weekend. So Caribana has and will always be a staple in Toronto.
Sure.
You ask anybody, they're like, Caribana, right?
Yeah.
Like, from out of here, they'll be like, yeah, Caribana on the in the summers. And it's in the summer, right? So it's like, the weather's perfect. Funny enough, like Drake's OVO Fest happens on the Caribana Sunday or Monday. I don't know. It's on one of those days.
Yeah.
So that's
crazy.
It's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, dude, I was blown away when I went there. It was like overwhelming just to see like semi trucks pulling like
That's
I
it,
don't even
right?
fucking know what to. I don't even know how to explain the loudness
Right.
of each one of those trucks
With
pulling down the
speakers,
street.
everything,
Yeah. Like,
And you know what the thing is
insane.
it's like, they take the page out of like, Carnival in these other countries and
Sure.
stuff like that, which is like the real deal out there. But, to your point, it's a thing. And like the sound systems come out, it's a whole thing.
Yeah,
right?
it's crazy.
And the parade alone is just like, doesn't matter if it's raining or not, they're going. You know what I mean? And it's a whole thing. So,
All right, so back into Olive Garden.
yeah.
How was that?
Excellent. I loved it, man. I loved working. I mean, I have to admit, I've job is what you make it, as they say, and I've lived by that. You know what I mean? And I think working at the Olive Garden was fun because I loved the food, breadsticks for sure. But yeah, like it was just one of those. It was one of those jobs that I just kind of like, when you're sort of still trying to figure out what you really want to do in your life, and it was like that in between thing. So I really like. I also started my career as a DJ, right? So for some reason I was able to, have the Olive Garden job, but I was a DJ at night. So, and they were so understanding that they would let me leave early enough to go DJ my parties. But
Nice.
yeah, so Olive Garden was fun, man. And it's funny because I'm still friends with some, and that was like, that's gotta be like 30 years ago almost right now.
Crazy.
And the craziest thing is, Olive Garden in Toronto no longer exists. So I worked there for like 3-4 years until it actually closed down, right? Like, and it's funny because I still have friends that I worked from there that are still friends of mine today. So.
Damn, man. That's amazing.
It's crazy. I mean, and all it's Olive Garden, man.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? So I have nothing bad to say about that place, man. And yeah, I think it was a fun time. I do tell this story to people, and people may have heard this, but like, like Olive Garden where they bring out the breadsticks in the basket. So also at that time, I used to like sell like dime bags, like the worst, right? But like, and I remember I'd have friends who would like, want to grab weed or not, but they'd want to go eat at the Olive Garden. So they'd be like, hey, on my way out, can I get like weed? I'd be like, put it in the basket. Can you tell the waiter, send that over to like table 4, you know what I mean? And they're going to put a $10 bill or whatever, $20 bill, and they're going to bring it back. And it's like, yeah. So it's like fun things like that. I know it's random as hell, but, I'm sure a lot of my old friends that used to buy weed off me back in the day would be like, yeah, remember we used to buy them at Olive Garden in the breadsticks in the basket? So, like, for real, like, that's a true
amazing,
story.
Dude. What was the weed policy or, like, the law like in, I guess, what's the history of it from just you being aware of it and forward?
Okay, so I find that Canada, well, first of all, and I was having a conversation about this with someone last night, like, for those who may not know, like, weed is legal in the entire country.
Okay.
You know what I mean? In Canada. It's not like how here certain states or whatnot. Like, so I feel like Canada's just been super like, we're just so like laid back for the most part. And it's crazy because back then it wasn't really, it's so weird because now that it's legal, I've made this, I find myself like hiding more now because it's legal, because it's like almost feels strange just smoking out in public like that. Whereas back then it was usually like if you get like caught smoking weed, and I remember because I did get caught smoking weed back in the day, it was like they're not bringing you to jail. You know what I mean? It's like you might get a little ticket here or whatnot, but it's not thing like, it was never crazy. Now, if you're like for the purpose of trafficking, like maybe there was a whole thing, but in my experience, it's always been pretty just like chill, because I guess maybe so many people smoke weed, right? But it's so weird when I think about it now, because if you go like Toronto specifically, there's a dispensary like every block I find. And it's crazy because they're all still in business. It's not like anyone's really gone out of business. So back then, it just kind of seemed like you would just have your local guy that you would go to or that you would buy it from. And it was just like, yeah, that's it. And we're just smoking and we're just chilling, right? Where now I'm more like, I'm not really just trying, just because it's legal doesn't mean I'm just going to go walk in front of like, you know, in the park where kids are hanging out. So, but it's for the most part, I find it kind of like a normal way of life out there. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure it is out here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, man.
Yeah, I mean, this is always a super progressive state.
Absolutely.
I think it was like the first, or maybe Oregon or something like that. Washington was one of like the first to go even medicinal. But that's crazy, dude. So what got you started with DJing?
So okay, so there's and I don't want to sound crazier, but like Filipinos, it's just like most Filipinos could probably relate to this. It's like you're either breakdancing or you're like DJing, you know what I mean? Or you're like good at graffiti or something like that. And you always have like the older cousin or something like that that's kind of like influenced you. And I have an older cousin who he's probably like 10 years older than me, and I remember him having like a DJ set in his house, and I thought it was like the coolest thing ever.
Cool.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the other thing is just like, because I was just like infatuated with that and watching like people scratching like, you know, on turntables, I just thought it was so cool. And he literally, and it's funny because every time I see him, I remind him that like, I don't think any of this would be happening for me had I not been sort of influenced by him DJing. So
sure.
So I have to give it to him. So shout out my cousin Arthur. He sort of was the first person that I had first seen like an actual like DJ set in his house and vinyl, and I was like, oh, this is cool, kind of thing. And then just kind of imitating it, you know what I mean? And then kind of like as I, you know, started, you know, getting to the age where I can kind of like go to like travel, like take the subway downtown, buy records at the record store or whatnot, and then you get your first shitty pair of turntables or whatnot. But I was just, you know, you first get the massive pyramid mixer, you know what I mean, the big one, and then you just like, it was exciting. So that was something that I was really like, I gravitated to. And of course, coming from a kind of, I guess you say, musical family, you know, and you know, all your folks usually had vinyl, right? So like, you're just like, whatever. So
you ever fuck up any of their vinyl?
Oh yeah, all day. Like, yeah, that's normal, right? You know what I mean? My parents are like been over that by now. You know what I mean? Like the old, you know, Bee Gees Saturday Night Fever record. That's like, oh, scratched up. Oh, all day. Absolutely. But yeah, that was my sort of first introduction into music in general. Well, not into music, but like what I feel was going to take me into the business of music eventually. So I started out as a DJ. And then I was really into, I was not a good breakdancer, but I would, you know, like scratching, and I would watch videos of like Hubert and, you know, like scratch videos.
Yeah, of
like,
course.
You know, especially in those 90s. And I was like, man, this is cool. You know
he was like the original pioneer I first heard about too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. You know, like, you know, you have the, you know, you have the Grand Wizard Theodores and the Grandmaster Flashes, you know what I mean? But I think in terms of the generation that was closer to my age, I was watching like Scratch Pickles, Beat Junkies, you know what I mean, from out here and the Bay Area, that like turntablism was like a thing. You know what I mean? And it still is, you know what I mean? But that was also an era too where I felt like, you know, from the DMC competitions to the ITF competitions, I got to shout out a lot of the DJs I got influenced in that sort of turntables world were all from the West Coast, man. You know, and of course you had the East Coast guys like, you know, the Executioners, Rock Rada and all that stuff. But if I was to really say, oh man, like these guys are like revolutionizing like how to use a turntable as an instrument, I give it up to like the West Coast, man. Like especially the DJs from the Bay Area, man. So it's insane. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember. I think Hubert was like a world champion like multiple times over, and had like the king. Yeah, he was the king.
And you know what? And it's crazy because to this day, I still follow what those guys do, and they're still very, very. It's like, I feel it's a little bit more of a niche market thing now. Like it always has been, but like, you know, now more than ever. Like, but these guys are still doing it. You know what I mean? And they have this incredible fan base that still follows them, and you watch the videos, and it's not like, it's like it's still evolving. Yeah. Like I'm like, wow. Or it's like I'm here freaking out in the 90s watching these guys in the early 2000s. It's 2023, and you're still like doing crazy shit on the turntables, and just the technology alone, as you know, the DJ equipment, like what it is. Like, I mean, I come from the era of vinyl.
Yeah.
Like, who would have ever thought, like, Serato and just the way it is now.
Yeah.
And just like the equipment and how they've still adapted to all this new equipment, but are still revolutionizing that whole world. It's fucking unbelievable.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, it's just like skateboarding, right?
Yeah.
Or snowboarding. It's like, man, like you'd think like, okay, like at what point do you not know how to do these? No, but it keeps evolving. So
Yeah, I mean, I remember, kind of similar to probably, I'm sure you saw same thing when like Tony Hawk landed like the first 900, and that was like,
that's
the
like
world
almost,
fucking stopped, and it was just like, yo, this guy just did some shit that we never. And my buddy Noah just sent me videos recap from last week's snowboarding X Games, and like opening tricks like 1640 guys just like coming out throwing
right
just
for start,
like,
right?
What the fuck, man? Like
Fucking
guys are
bonkers.
doing 4 front flips and shit on
Yeah,
BMX,
man.
and you're just like,
Dude,
what?
I'm watching that. That's the craziest shit. Like, I'm serious. It's exactly that. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? But like, yeah, it's like people like. I was watching that thing. It's funny you brought up the Tony Hawk thing. I was just watching his documentary recently. There's this documentary that's dead, and it was showing that whole thing, like when he was attempting this thing, like just kept going, and the whole crowd is rooting him on, and he was just like in the fucking zone, and then he lands it, and
yeah.
it's like holy shit, right?
Yeah.
And that was like how long ago now? That's probably got to be like
15, 18
yeah,
years
exactly,
ago
right,
at least.
right?
No, probably
So,
more. Yeah, probably more than 20 years ago, honestly.
right? Yeah. So,
Yeah,
it's incredible.
it really is. So with DJing, was that like kind of sounds like first experience into like entrepreneurship in a way? Like,
Absolutely.
Are you throwing your own parties? Or
Correct.
are you, okay. So
Yeah.
it's literally like, I'm going to throw a party. I'm going to charge for
Exactly.
door, and I'm going to make money tonight.
Yeah, so that kind of sort of came as a result of just like, first of all, DJing when you first are starting, it's like you'll just DJ because you just for the passion, you know
Totally.
what I mean? And which I live by that all day. It was never about the money, you know what I mean? Until it's about the money, right? You know what I mean? But at them times it was like, you're DJing parties, and I remember, and I tell this story a lot, is like for me personally, it was like I'd be DJing parties, and then the typical promoter story, sorry, we didn't make enough money, so you're not getting paid tonight. And to me, that was like, okay, because I did enjoy it, but I was like, what if I just cut out the middleman, so to say? And so that's where I kind of started really getting into just, hey, if I threw my own parties, DJ'd my own parties, promoted my own parties, then all the money's just going to come to me. Or if I'm going to lose money, at least it's my money.
And
That's
on
it. I'm
me.
not exactly.
Yeah.
It's all on me. And that definitely taught me a lot about marketing. That's where it got my first sort of like, okay, like, you got to promote your parties. The risk is all yours at that point. You know what I mean? And I had a DJ partner, a DJ crew who was super instrumental in that, like in that. But I think, again, that was really, for me, was my sort of first sort of introduction into sort of entrepreneurial, that type of thing, like my entrepreneurial side, because that then led to, throwing parties. And so I'm going to skip a little bit, but those parties started to become pretty successful for me, at least back in Toronto. And we just kind of like, we created a little bit of a niche for us, right? So first of all, Filipinos, like in anything, always support each other. So our parties were like the hip hop parties in Toronto, and with like a lot of Filipinos. But here's the thing, usually when you throw hip hop parties, usually you think it's like a lot of dudes,
Yeah.
right? But like for us, like we were known for like, we would be mixing in like the R&B acapellas over the hip hop beats. So all of our parties, all the girls would come out, right? So a lot of people, and you know what it is. If girls are coming out, guess what?
Everybody's
Guys come
gonna- yeah,
out,
for
right?
sure.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean? That's just what it is.
Yeah.
And so we kind of found a little niche in that part for us, especially in the city, where like people would just come to our parties because they knew there was going to be like good hip hop music. So we'll play like the most hardcore stuff from like, the early like whatever, Biggie Small stuff from the 90s to like the most R&B jiggy shit for the girls. And then like it's just good vibes, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then what I used to do is because, you always want to try to sort of separate yourself from like every other promoter out there, every other party. One of the biggest things that I really used to do at that time was I used to cold call record labels to be like the street teams. You know
Nice.
what I mean? Yeah. So I'd be like, come to my parties and give out your free promo stuff at my parties, because at least anybody who would come to my party, they'd be walking out with like a free, I don't know, tchotchke, like a free promo
Candle or
item.
something, yeah.
Exactly. Or t-shirt. And like that kind of sort of started to kind of be a thing, right?
Totally.
Like, yeah. And then that is essentially kind of got my foot in the door in sort of the label world. You know what I mean?
Cool, man. That's a smart strategy.
Yeah, it kind of worked out, man. And it's funny because that's literally was like, for me, that's kind of my first introduction into sort of the label world too. But at the same time, while I was DJing, the parties were getting a little bit bigger. But I also wanted to just kind of like explore, diversify, like how do I sort of stay in this world a little bit? And I started doing college radio as well. Like I landed on an opportunity, like relationships to me is just everything, right? Like that's just what it is, right? And, through those experiences and meeting people and stuff like that, you build relationships along the way. And, one of those relationships that I met was just like, hey, you know what? Like I do this college radio show and this was like in a city called Kitchener-Waterloo, which is about like 45 minutes to an hour outside of Toronto.
Okay.
But he was like, I do this small radio station in this like little shitty college fucking hut wherever, but we're on the radio and it's not the hugest frequency. Would you like to come out and check out my show? I was like, absolutely, right? Because it's like on the radio and you're like, what excited, and it was crazy. So I did, and then I fast forward, I inherited the show, like they just gave it to me.
Wow.
And because this was a city that's already further out, it's not like Toronto.
Sure.
But like I'm from Toronto, I'm getting all of the music directly from, Toronto or, New York, because New York is an hour away. It was like new for like a lot of the people in that city to get like the music just as fast as Toronto, let's call it.
Sure.
And so we start building a name for ourselves out there.
Sick.
You know what I mean? So that's kind of like was an interesting part, kind of a pivotal part in my career in terms of like being able to get on the radio, college radio, and then start doing parties out there. And it's a university town too, so we were doing the university parties out there. It was a whole thing, you know what I mean? So,
dude, that's fucking awesome.
it was fun.
How were you like initially from kind of the first few parties and as it progressed, doing like the marketing promo side of things? Like how are you getting the word out at that point in time?
Oh man, hand to hand, man. Direct marketing, guerrilla marketing, man. That's just what it was. Like, I fucking wish that we had fucking social media. Like, there's no fucking way, right? Like, it was literally like the street team era, which is the era I come from, right? Like, that's what it was. It was just like all these labels would be giving out like, free promo, like stickers, and we would vandalize the shit out of the streets of Toronto, especially during Caravana. Like, you know what I mean? Like the picket signs, the posters, like that's what it was. It was like we would go print out flyers. I remember like at Kinko's, like, which would be like, remember like that?
Did the same thing, yeah.
Right, you print them out, go to the machete thing that gets that, and you literally stand outside the fucking club in the fucking, and Toronto, the winter's brick, you know what I mean? It gets cold. We'd be standing out there just handing the shit out, but that's what it was. And I think like to this day, I still go by that. Like, you got to be in the mix, man. And that whole being like in the culture, so to say, is like what it was. So I've learned, I owe a lot of that just to like being on the ground and being in the mix. I always say that like being in the mix is so important, and it taught us a lot because, you're literally like, we would be going from club to club, handing out, or barbershop, salon, nail salon, I don't know where it was, just to hand out, to promote. That's what it was. It was, or like, we'd have beepers back in the day, or it's like we have the hotline that you call, and you can like, you call the hotline and then they call and there's the message on there. Oh, this is where like stuff like that. And then, and of course, we relied on college radio to go promote our parties. You know what I mean? Come and ask for the whoever to promote these parties. And Toronto's not a big city like that in terms of like the industry. It's still pretty small. So, but it's word of mouth, and that's just what it is. And I'm still such a big like advocate for word of mouth, even in this era of like
100%.
Social media. Like, it's just what it is, right?
Yeah, it's a necessary component.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of like my first sort of. That's how we used to promote our stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So cool. So you're doing the college radio show, still doing shows in Toronto, starting to get relationships through record labels, and what's the next steps forward? So
I'll rewind a little bit. So one of the things, and I encourage this to a lot of people, I always say invest in yourself, right? Like always, like all that money I would make at Olive Garden tips, like what I would do is like, I would invest that money and I would take trips to New York City in the 90s. And there were certain events that would happen like conferences. Like there was the Rocksteady Crew anniversary party that would happen. So they were like world renowned. Rocksteady Crew, just Google it. Like that's world renowned. And they would have these anniversary parties. And because I was so much into sort of the elements of the culture, so the b-boys and the graffitis and the turntablists and the MC thing, I would literally take these trips to New York City to kind of really just take in the real sort of culture.
Yeah.
And when I was taking these trips out there, this is a true story. Like usually I would go on the weekends, right? But the thing is because I was on college radio, not only was I be calling labels in Canada, I'd be calling U.S. labels out there, cold calls, right? Like phone calls, being like, hey, I DJ on the radio out here, would love to get promo vinyl to promote. And they would be like, send me vinyl all the time. But because I'd be going to New York on the weekends, remember the labels were never open on the weekends, right? They're always, it's business hours.
Yeah.
So I would never actually get a chance to meet the people that I would talk to on the phone or that would be sending me this vinyl. And then on one trip, I decided, you know what? I'm actually going to extend my trip and I'm going to stay for a week, like during the week.
Yeah.
And there was this one gentleman, and to this day, I'm still trying to find this person, right? His name was Pierre. I cannot remember his last name, but he worked at Arista Records, which at that time distributed Bad Boy. And I remember...
Pierre?
His name was Pierre,
all
right? But not Pierre
Anybody
Harv,
knows.
Not Pierre Harv, who most people would think, but he was the college mix show rep. So he was the guy that would hand out the vinyl to I guess service across the country or whatnot.
Sure.
And I remember he invited me into a meeting. It was the first time I ever walked into an actual record label in America. And I kid you not, Nick, this should change my life. It opened my eyes to like what was possible. And I walked into, and this is in New York City at the prime of like the fucking boom bap era / going into the jiggy era. You know what I mean? In the 90s, in New York City of all fucking places.
Yeah. What was the
what I mean?
atmosphere like?
Oh man, it's like, so like I said, I used to go to these anniversary parties, Rocksteady things, which was like, it was fucking like, it was life changing to me because it's like coming from Toronto and you go to New York City and you're going to this free fucking party out on the pier or like at Rocksteady Park, and I'm watching all the like Wu-Tang Clan free concert, KRS-One over here, fucking Fat Joe, Big Pun over, like it was just like crazy. And then in that corner over there, it's like graffiti writers all hanging out, and then B-boys, B-girls over there. It was like the fucking culture.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what the fuck is happening? Like this is what it is. And I'm the kid who grew up on Beat Street. I'm the guy who grew up on Break It, like these movies, and I'm seeing Crazy Legs from Rocksteady Crew, who I grew up watching when I was trying to fucking do breakdance, you know what I mean? And he's fucking hosting this party, and it was like hip-hop at its finest, but it's fucking there. It's right in front of you right now. And that shit changed me, man. I was like, damn. So that was already fucking tripped out to me. So now I'm fucking... So that's really what started my trips to New York City, specifically. So now I'm walking into this record company, record label, and of course, and it's funny. So I walk into this place, and it's the first time where, first of all, man, Pierre comes out like in like fucking jogging pants, and like he wasn't even wearing shoes. He was like in his like slippers or something. He's like in his house shoes, like chilling. And then I walk in this man's office. He's got fucking plaques up there. He's got vinyl over here, speakers. It's like, holy shit! Like this is cool as shit. Like, and I remember at that day, I was like, this is what the fuck I want to do. Like, I don't know how the fuck I'm going to do it, but I would love to be able to like come to work that's something like this. You know what I mean? And that was sort of my first like aha moment. You know what I mean? Like, cause you start thinking it's like, I'm a DJ. Great. I promote parties. Okay. How do you fucking level up? You know what I mean? And this was like, to me, this could be possibly the next sort of iteration of what my career could be. You know what I mean? Like, radio, okay, got it. Fucking marketing, I kind of got it. We're doing all street team shit. That's just what we do, the cultural part of it. And then I was like, when I get back home, this is my goal. I need to figure this out. So now when I'm throwing these fucking parties, what do? Like I told you, I call the street team. I call the labels. Yeah. Come to my parties. Go fucking, hand out your free shit. Put up posters at my party, whatever. Invite all the fucking people you want. Guest list you all. You just need to be at my parties. And then those, again, relationships lead to like, who's this guy that keeps throwing these parties that like all the, at them times, I used to call all the labels. So it was like all the different street teams
would show up.
They would show up, right? And they all know me. And it's not like, and these guys, remember, these street team kids, they weren't like really paid a lot.
Yeah.
So it's not like they had beef with each other.
Yeah.
They're all just trying to get in. So it was just like, for me, I wanted to be with these guys. These are the fucking coolest cats right now, because these are the ones that have all the promo shit. They're the coolest guys at the fucking label.
Yeah.
They're the bottom of the fucking barrel. You know what I mean? Like, they're not even on full-time salaries or whatever. If they're probably like on contract, whatever.
Sure.
But they were the ones that had their fingers on the pulse, so to say. That's what I care about. You know what I mean? And that's where the culture starts. So I would invite these people to my parties, and my parties, like I said, they just started to get a little bit more popular. And then one day there was just this opening that happened. There was a job opening at Polygram Records, which was Def Jam at the time. Like, it was the mother company, the parent company, I guess. And all because I had built, again, these relationships with all these street team guys that were like, hey, you ever think about applying for it? And I was like, hell yeah. And funny enough, man, I did apply for that, and here we are. And I'm 24 years later, I'm still working for the company. It's
no way.
Crazy, right? It's insane. And so I started out as a street team guy, and I loved it. I don't think that experience to me is the only reason why, like, I'm probably like still doing what I like. If it wasn't for that, there's no fucking way. You know what I mean? And it's funny because I still to this day, and I tell this to a lot of people, is like, that to me is the most, like, even to this day, it's like, if it's not hot in the street, nobody gives a shit.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care what anybody says. And you can dump as much money as you want into something, but if the street doesn't say it's hot, it doesn't work.
Anywhere.
It's not going anywhere. You know what I mean? And so I use that. I still use that philosophy every day that I come to work. You know what I mean? But so I started out in street team stuff, and kind of just, which was ultimately marketing.
Was this in Canada or was this in the States?
This is in Canada.
Okay.
Yeah, this is in Canada. And at that time, it was I always say this, like, I caught what I would call the last 2 years of, like, put it this way, I started 2 years before Napster.
Wow.
So I caught that last lick of, like, the music industry, where I kind of felt like they were printing money in them days. They were fucking printing money, right? You know what I mean? And I was like, damn, like, you caught that. But again, it was never really about the money to me. Like, it just never was. I just wanted a foot. I always just wanted to level up, right?
Yeah.
And so from DJing parties, and now, like, oh shit, like, and I remember when I first did that job interview, they were like, okay, well, like, we know that you throw parties and you invite all the street teams. I'm like, yeah, but don't worry, at this place, I'll just put up more Def Jam posters than I will with any other label. And anyways, like, I get the job. So that's how it worked. And marketing, and then from being out all the time, I'm just trying to fast forward a little bit. But
no, dude, don't skip.
Yeah,
I'm super fucking interested.
No,
in
it's
the
perfect.
progression. It's so cool.
Yeah, so, like, being on the street all the time, it was basically like I was the guy still that was like, in the street, so to say.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I'm at all the clubs, and of course there was a team of people and it's funny because from the day that I got the gig, the team who had already known me because of my parties, it's like, and it's funny because I'm still friends with some of them to this day. They kind of nominated me to be like the sort of street team head of it, like the leader, I guess, because I had organizational skills, I guess, from parties, and I had a little bit of a background, I guess, you know, from the stuff that I'd done.
Sure.
And so, yeah, and then that experience led to, like, you just, from the moment now, because now you start to be like, fuck, I got a fucking job. I was, a year and a half ago, I'm walking in New York to my man's office, and it's like, I think it's happening. Like, we're getting closer and closer. And again, like I said, it was never about the money to me. I just wanted the experience, right? And just to be able to be in the mix again. You know what I mean? And that opportunity, remember, it was like my job first was like, you're going to be a street team guy, but really all you need to do is you need to come in here once a week, go to the front door, and the boxes are there waiting for you, put them up on the street, hand it out. Like, it wasn't like
You're
they
in
expected,
the building.
yeah,
really.
not like physically in the building. And I remember the person, and it's funny because the person who actually hired me, this is how fucking life works, Nick. The person who hired me for that job, it's somebody I actually went to high school with.
No way.
And she knew me because I DJ'd our high school dance. Right? Is this fucking crazy, right? This is how fucking life works, right? And it's just for some reason, she was like, oh my God, and the craziest thing is this person who hired me, like, back in high school, and I remembered her, like, she wasn't even really in music like that. You know what I mean? But it's relations, right? You know what I mean? And just those moments. So I get this gig, right? And again, it was like, it's not like it wasn't like a salary. It was like a contract work that you get, but I just wanted it. I was like, I just want to be in the mix. I'll figure it out from here. So I get this gig. They tell me, oh, all you need to do is come in once a week and go pick up the shit. I was like, all right, cool. But then I was like, listen, is there a possibility that you can just give me a fucking desk? I promise you can put me in the bathroom for all I care. Like, it didn't matter. Put me in the back room where nobody can see me, as long as there's maybe like a computer that I can just kind of just let me, I can do more than just put up posters. Like I have a little bit of a marketing background because of the parties I throw. And I just started like, can I just have an area that I can just be there? Cause I just wanted to be in there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they were like, yeah, sure. Why not? Like, we'll put you over fucking there. We're like, you know what I mean? Like where we hide the dead bodies or whatnot. You know what I mean? But
I've been to those places.
Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? So yeah. So I get this fucking, I get this desk. And then that's when I was like, it's fucking on now, because now I'm in the building and I didn't care. It didn't matter if you pay me, but I'm in the mix now.
Yeah.
Right. And that was when I took the opportunity to be a fucking sponge, like be a fly on the wall, but yet ask a lot of questions.
Sure.
Now, mind you, remember, because I wasn't really paid a salary. Well, guess what? I'm making my money how? I'm making a little bit of money off of this street team stuff. I'm fucking making money a little bit from DJing, throwing parties. I'm still selling dime bags, right? Fucking true story, right? I'm still fucking selling dime because I got to, right?
Yeah.
And then, well, guess what?
I feel like that's everybody's start.
Right, everyone's start.
If you had a relationship to working in music at any point in your life,
You
there was
fucking
some
sold
form
of like illegal, like whatever, contraband shit you're selling. So I'm fucking selling dime bags. But this works out in my fucking favor, because the very first fucking tour that I ever worked was the Hard Knock Life tour.
Wow.
That came to Toronto. And I'm like, so I'm the head of the street team. Well, guess what? You got fucking Jay-Z, you got fucking DMX, Ja Rule,
Method Man, Red
Method
Man.
Red. Well, guess what they want?
Everybody wants that.
Everybody wants
Yeah.
weed, right? And you know what? Who do they call? They call the fucking street team guys. Well, I'm right here. And that, again, was another incredible opportunity for me, because I remember that tour perfectly. And it was like, I was excited to be part of this sort of like moment in time that like, A, it's the fucking Hard Knock Life tour that's coming to Toronto. B, like, Def Jam at that time, they were sending their street teams out here, like on these tours. So I'm building relationships with the street teams out there. You know what I mean? And of course, they're coming in these fucking tour buses of their own. The street teams had their own fucking tour bus. And I'm like, this is fucking bonkers. And so now I'm fucking selling weed. I'm selling weed to the fucking, I remember selling weed to Memphis Bleak, fucking Ja Rule, DMX, Method Red. Like, I have fucking pictures to this day. Like,
so cool.
Of like being in the mix with these guys.
Yeah.
And, to me, it was just like, man, this is what it's fucking about. So now watch this. So I remember after the tour happened, somehow, normally when these tours happen, you get the publicist that sort of handles this stuff. But like our publicist, who, by the way, is a friend of mine to this day, she no longer works at the company, but she was approached by, I guess, whoever the tour manager was. And he said, whoever it was on your street team that handled, like, took care of us, he took very good care of us. So please thank that person. And I guess somehow my name, as the fucking guy who sits in the back, like where we hide the dead bodies.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, they're shouting you out, apparently, right? Like, I don't know what the fuck you did, but they bigged you up hard. And I was like, bingo, right? Like, we're in, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then all of a sudden, my desk is not in the fucking area. It's
Yeah.
like, hey, why don't you sit over here? Like, you know what I mean? We're like, whatever. And they were like, and so that's just what it was, you build these relationships. And it kind of just, I took advantage of that opportunity to just kind of ask questions and like, and just soak it in, right? I would literally like that. And then I was known as the guy's like, well, you want weed, or you want to know when the artist would come into town, you want to go to the club, talk to Ives and the street team.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because they're the guys that know where it's at. And that's literally like kind of sort of how it kind of started.
Yeah.
And then after that, you start to kind of, take on a little bit more responsibilities. Like I wanted that area because I wanted to show them like, hey, outside of just throwing parties, like I know how to put up posters for one thing, but I also I have a marketing background. I know how to throw parties, and I know every fucking promoter in the city. Like, you know what I mean? I know all the DJs. I know all the fucking, I came from radio. I know the fucking record pools. I know how that shit. And then it was like, okay, well now on top of doing the street team stuff, you're going to be the guy who's going to go service all the DJs. perfect. Like, you know what I mean? I love it, right? This is like, now I'm getting in the mix, right? And then that was my next job. I'm still street team guy, but I'm also the guy like getting a little bit more response. And again, you didn't have to pay me more money.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be in the mix, right? And then all of a sudden I start learning about how, you know, DJ servicing works, you know what I mean? And how, you know, you'd be mailing vinyl packages out, the same shit that I used to get from my guy Pierre in New York. And so now I'm watching all this. Next thing I know, and I'm fast forwarding a little bit, but like, now I got an office now, and there's fucking a stereo system in here, and like, oh shit. And then I got my first plaque, like, and it's sort of, you know, you start to envision this thing, and and that's kind of like how it works, right?
What was the first plaque?
The first plaque I got, it's funny. So there was a DJ crew back in Toronto that we did one. It was funny. They were ahead of their time. There was a very popular DJ crew, and any Canadian, especially from Toronto, will know this crew. They're called the Baby Blue Sound Crew. They were like the top DJ crew doing mixtapes in like the late 90s, like whatever, in Toronto. And I guess Universal they did this deal with them where they were going to sign them as artists and do a compilation album. And the first record, funny enough, that they did was a record with that was like Baby Blue Sound Crew featuring Cardinal Official.
Wow.
Right? Cardi's a fucking legend, obviously.
He is, man.
Cardi,
fucking amazing.
Julie Black, and Sean Paul, a young Sean Paul, right? And this record was called Money Jane. Fucking record went gold out in Canada, right? And it was like, I think it was Canada's real introduction to Sean Paul. And most people, I'm sure, will know, and I'm sure, you know, Sean Paul's team would probably tell you that, you know, Canada's got a lot of love for Sean Paul, and you know, he to some degree may have even broken out of Canada, you know what I mean? So that was my first plaque.
Dude, that's
so I got
fucking
yeah, so
cool.
I get this
Full
fucking
circle.
plaque, right? Yeah, and then, you know, and then after that, my second plaque was Dr. Dre's 2001.
No way.
Yeah, that was my second plaque. And then it's kind of and then that becomes like the Interscope era, you know, the Interscope era where they just start to dominate. So, you know, but yeah, so I'm watching all of this happen, and that's kind of like how it works, man.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's so fucking cool, dude.
Thank you, man. It's interesting, man. It's fun, man. And I cherish those days to this day, and I never forget that, you know, and I still like, you know, still trying to get more plaques, you know.
So at that point in time, you're clearly getting promoted. Is it still in the street team marketing promo lane? That's where your career is.
Exactly. So funny enough, I ended up from that point, it was so definitely in marketing, and then I ended up running the entire department for what was then called, I guess, the urban department.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Is what they're called, or the black music department.
Yeah.
Is what was some, you know.
Yeah.
So I ended up pretty well much like overseeing all the marketing for our hip hop and R&B titles. So I'm like kind of fast forwarding, but that's kind of eventually, it was still marketing.
Yeah.
And so I was overseeing a lot of that. And funny, the way it works is like, you know, like then, and it's still to this day, so Universal Music Canada is sort of like the main label, let's call it. But in Canada, our office, we're all in one building. So like, unlike here where like Interscope is over there, you know, Republic is in another building in New York or whatever. In Canada, our head office being in Toronto, which is where I'm from, we were all in one office.
Right.
But the way it was back then, it was like the building was split.
Partition, yeah.
So one side is Island Def Jam.
Yeah.
And the other side was the Interscope Geffen labels. My area and my team was right in the middle because we worked label blind, so to say. We worked everything.
Sure.
So I kind of get the best of both worlds, right? So we'd have like, you know, it was just basically the East Coast versus the West Coast labels. So like East Coast being the you know, the Island Def Jam Republics, the West Coast being Interscope Geffen, you know what I mean? Which were obviously all great labels, but you know, the big ones at that time was like, well, Def Jam always was just, you know, it's a fucking
Kingpin.
iconic label, right?
Sure.
And at that time, like New York is for sure, it's just the mecca, right? And hip hop. But, you know, Interscope really had a great run with like, you know, with Dre, Eminem, and then 50, you know what I mean? Like they crushed it. And
Totally.
Like, but I was also doing Ja Rule records before 50 came around, you know what I mean? So it was really an interesting time, man. And then that experience alone, like I said, overseeing marketing, but because I'm still out all the time, I just naturally started seeing acts. You know what I mean? Like, so which is now leading me into sort of, I guess, where I land now. I tell you, I never had a fucking desire to work in A&R. Never. Like it and I mean that I'm grateful, but that was never to me something I thought about. I was more kind of just enjoying, you know, especially coming from Canada, you're working like these international titles.
Yeah.
And I'm building relationships with the labels in America. So I'm like the guy in Canada that when Jay Brown, who was working at Def Jam at the time and is promoting Rihanna records in Toronto, he's talking Ives, call Ives, because Ives is, and so I'm building these relationships. Or if like, whoever, in on the Interscope side, it's like let's go talk to, you know what I mean, let's go talk to the Canadian guys.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's usually me and my team. So that's kind of like was always fun for me, just building the relationships, right?
Yeah.
And being out all the time again, I just naturally was like seeing bands, or artists. So I would always tell our A&R department at that time, like, yeah, it's like, go check out this act or whatnot. And naturally kind of found my way there. But I also ended up in A&R because it was also a point in my career now, like, because we're going over years now where, you always want to kind of like, at least for me, reinvent yourself.
Yeah.
And you kind of want to always like, level up, as they say.
Totally.
And that was what happened for me. It was like, I've been doing this thing for a minute now on the marketing side. And at the same time, remember, I've also skipped the fact that Napster also came and went, right? And just annihilated the music industry. And I was able to sort of like navigate those storms, you know what I mean? And it was a time too where I saw also a lot of people lose their jobs.
Yeah.
Like people where I looked up to that all of a sudden woke up one day and never had jobs anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm like the fucking street team / marketing guy who's just over
Hanging
here.
in.
Like,
Yeah.
what the fuck? Like, you know what I mean? But it also came at a time when there's like a lot of downsizing in the music industry. And I was just, I was given an opportunity to kind of like, because I guess I had a lot of relationships in that world and just seeing a lot of bands or artists or whatnot. It was like, hey, listen, man, do you want to move over here? And I was like, you know what? Like, sure. Like maybe just try it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because while I was seeing people losing jobs, I was like, you're being lucky that you're even being offered something, you know what I mean, that I also know that people would probably kill for.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what it was.
Yeah, I got a glimpse of that when I first moved here in 2008. I was interning at Interscope.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there for like 9 months or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I was showing up probably 5 days a week when I was only supposed to be there 2 or 3.
Yeah.
I would be staying until pretty much everybody left the office, and trying to just same thing, like socialize, figure out where I kind of fit in. And at the same time, I was still getting my studio off the ground and working with like some of the more popular underground LA artists that were becoming not underground artists anymore.
Yeah.
And I mean, I didn't go to college, so for most of those jobs, it's like you need a college diploma or college degree, or they're not even going to look at your resume. They just skip over you.
Same with me. High school diploma. That's it.
So I was there for 9 months, and I remember like I was seeing the studio growing from like a hobby / like thing I loved, same thing, like would just do for free for years to support the artists that I met here, and was just fucking fun.
Right.
And then I remember going there, I want to say it was around like maybe Christmas time, like before the end of the year. And they probably had, if it wasn't like the biggest round of layoffs, it was one of the bigger rounds of layoffs. Mm-hmm. And I remember the atmosphere there and really just making that the deciding factor of like, I don't want to have a job here now, because I don't want to be some guy who just brought 20 years worth of great relationships or artists or knowledge or whatever to this company, and they just can walk into my room office one day and just be like, yo, dude, pack up your shit and don't come back on Monday.
Yeah.
And like that inability to like control. I mean, obviously, people survive, and there's a reason certain people survive those layoffs, but I watched them gut like the head of marketing, the head of this, and you're just like, holy shit. Like,
it's crazy, right?
Yeah. And then it's like which is also amazing that you've stayed at the same place for so long, because the industry, at least here, is notorious for
turnover.
Yeah. And you're just rotating constantly to like, okay, cool. Well, Interscope gutted their whole office and Def Jam gutted their whole office. And now we have people who are just flip flopping from one place to another. And You know,
it's like this like incestuous kind of thing.
It
like,
is.
It's crazy because I've noticed that too. I'm extremely grateful and thankful that I have been able to stay in one place. And I've had opportunities that have been presented to me to work in the U.S. that, first and foremost, I think it was by choice that I've always wanted to, excuse me, stay in Canada. But one of the big factors was like the fear of the turnover.
Yeah.
In America, like you work so long out here, and and again, and even though we have that as well here, but the thought of like maybe going there and then being sent back home within a year was scary for me. You know what I mean? But I do know what you mean, like, because the turnover. If there's one thing I've learned, like I have friends who have worked in the label system maybe as long as I have here in America, but have worked at every every label, worked at this publisher or this studio or whatnot, or some have worked at the same label twice, like went, left, came back, went there, and then came back. It's like crazy, right? But yeah, I know what you mean. It's scary. And I think Canada, I a big shout out to Canada in that world, because I've been able to just. But then I'm fucking good at my job, man. Fuck that. Like, you know what I mean? Like just keep it real, right? Sorry, I don't mean to sound crazy, but I do really do appreciate that I've been able to just kind of sort of stay afloat. You know what I mean? But like I said, like I've been able to adapt. I've been able to sort of, but I've also, a lot of that for me is just because I'm all about like paying it forward. Like I really am a big thing of that, and I've always been of the mind of like work with people smarter than you.
Yeah, 100%.
And in this game, I find that the culture is driven by the younger demographic.
Yeah.
And I surround myself constantly with the younger generation not to school them, but to learn from them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, be able to guide them with sort of just some of the OG sort of
knowledge
ways of knowledge too. And it's worked in my favor. And I think that's a big part of why I feel like I've been able to do it, because a lot of the times I'm like, the first person I want to talk to in a room about something is like the youngest kid in the room, like who fucking understands social media or who understands culture.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Outside of like the fucking us old fucking heads, you know what I mean? That don't even go out. You know what I mean? So I pride myself on that, and I'm very much about empowering, you know what I mean? And really just trying to lead like that and let people like fail even at the same time, fail forward, as they say. So yeah, it's honestly like it's been great, you know what I mean? And that's all I do is just listen to the younger, or like anytime a new intern like comes into our office, like I want to speak to that person, you know. Or usually I'm fortunate that they want to talk to me, you know what I mean? I've had so many interns that I've come through that company that would like either I'd request to meet with them or they'd request to meet me, and it's sort of this cool thing, and some of them have started as interns who are now doing their thing, and I'm like, fuck, man, I'm like, it's amazing. And I think that sort of that vibe, positive like reinforcement and encouraging and empowering people is a very powerful thing.
It is.
You know what I mean?
100%.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to, I guess maybe there's a gap, but when I first met you through Franco.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, shout out Franco.
Yeah.
Frank Russo, man. My guy.
He was putting me on to jazz.
Yes.
Was Dead or Alive the song, or was that the mixtape? That was
Dead or
the
Alive
song.
was the song.
That was my fucking favorite, man. When I heard that,
man.
I remember he played me that song, and I was just like, that's the fucking one.
Yeah.
And then you guys came down here, and we linked for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that was too big of a jump. Was that like one of the first artists that you were starting to take in as like A&R and finding people, or did you have people before that?
Well, I had worked with artists before, but
okay,
like obviously in the A&R capacity, but that was the first artist where I managed.
Right.
You know what I mean? And thank you to Universal Music Canada, who not only allowed me to manage him, but like, I signed him to the label. So they were super supportive in letting me do that, you know? But that one was where like, it was although we've parted ways since, it to me was a very incredible moment in my life. You know what I mean? In terms of learning another part of the music industry. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think my experience managing artists like jazz is something that I don't think I would have ever learned sitting behind a computer, right?
Yeah,
Like,
of course.
because you that was really in the mix, right?
Yeah.
Like that's like, okay, now I'm going on tour with the kid. I'm learning how to advance shows. I'm learning the management side of things. You know what I mean? I'm learning about, just, like other things that you're not just learning at the record label. And then I'm also ultimately learning like the touring game. You know what I mean? The merch game. But yeah, to answer your question, that would have been for me my first sort of real, like, because I've always managed people. Here's the thing I say about management, right? Like in any capacity. You're fucking managing. You're just fucking managing personalities.
Yeah.
You're managing egos. You're managing personalities, right? And I find that I'm a pretty social person in terms of like, I've always liked vibes with people. You know what I mean? And I think that experience for me, and when you're really passionate about something like that, which I was, like, I really, really, like, I put all of that, like a lot of my time was dedicated to jazz because I believed in him. And at the same time, I know that the type of attention an artist needs, not just from like a label side, but like just in general, like even on the management side, like it takes a lot of time, right? You know what I mean? And I mean, it was at the point like, jazz lived with me, you know what I mean? For a bit of time. And it's just like, but it was just something it was my real first experience in terms of just like, okay, like this is another part of the industry that I'm learning later in my life, because I'd already been working at the label at that point for like 15 years or whatnot, 14, 15 years. And now I'm kind of like, now I got this artist, I'm completely like vested into it, right? You know what I mean? And on top of that, like, not only am I managing him, like, I fucking signed him to the fucking label that I work at.
Yeah.
So there's also double pressure now, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, well, you fucking better knock this fucking thing out the park. You know what I mean? But at the same time, it's also just like, I think I was so fortunate enough to be able to like not be bothered with that. Like, meaning like the label's like, all right, he's zoned in. Let him do his fucking thing. Let him fucking do his thing. And it was like, I didn't have to worry about any other artists. It's like, let the other A&Rs go sign whatever they want.
Yeah.
But let's do this. And I think it was also an interesting time too, because, Jazz was also an artist who I felt and I believed was, an artist that was really starting to build a name for himself without necessarily a cosign from another artist, especially like at that time, like the OVOs or the EXOs camps, who I could have easily called because I worked all their records, you know what I mean? And I know all those camps as well, but it was just kind of like my own, personal project, I guess you can say. And it was a really fun time in my life. And it obviously it brought us together.
Yeah.
And that was a whole thing, because that was like the first times we were coming to Los Angeles in general, you know what I mean? And like, I remember like doing our first show at fucking Las Palmas, you know what I mean? And it was like, oh man, we're fucking doing our first, like show in LA, you know what I mean?
Dude, it's a hard, I mean, I for me, most of my career has been going to a lot of first shows, going to a lot of the first 5 or 10 or 15 shows, and seeing like, oh, it's everybody's family. It's like the friends. You know what I mean? Like it's hard to get people to move. Yeah. Then it's hard to get people to actually give you energy in a venue in LA. LA is a very fucking difficult place when you're starting, slowly advancing through the, like, until you have just blown it out. Yeah. Everything else pretty much sucks to do shows. And I remember that show, first show, he had people going fucking crazy. And that was for me a moment of like, yeah, like this kid is a fucking superstar. He brings the energy like you wouldn't fucking believe for every song he's performing. Yeah. And he's got, which in my opinion at that time was like a hit song, you know, with Dead or Alive. Like that was just like, dude, if that caught with big money, like that's going. And
this was before, remember, this was before DSPs, right? There was no Spotify. This is a SoundCloud era. You know what I mean? So it was that. So imagine even all that, everything you just said, but imagine fucking from Canada. Yeah. You know what I mean? Even though jazz has, dual citizenship and stuff like that, like we're coming from Canada, right? At least for me, I'm like, damn, this is like fucking surreal. Yeah. You know what I mean? Now, but at the same time, I'm a fucking student of the game, right? You know what I mean? Like, I'm in the 90s. Remember, I'm going to the Rocksteady anniversaries, watching Wu-Tang Free over here. Everything I just said earlier, right? And now I'm kind of like in it with this artist that not only signed the label, but it's like I fucking manage this kid, and I'm like, I'm like seeing it in real time. You know what I mean? And Jazz was, he's younger than me. And so again, this is your world, Jazz. Like this is your world. And like Jazz is, at that time, especially, he's just fucking like it was effortless for this guy to be cool. Like, he was effortless, and that's what I gravitated to. And at the time,
still
like,
is. Still
he's still
is.
right. Yeah. And it was just like, it was also a time that, like, in Toronto, where I felt like, you had the XOs that would sort of established at that point or really starting to do their thing. And you had the OVO camp that was already doing their thing. And it was like, the Get Home Safe crew, which was the crew that he was part of back then. Like, there was just this movement that was happening in the city that was like, like, it's like, when I look around here and I see the Keith Haring stuff, like, like the fucking Basquiat, like that early, like, 80s, 70s New York shit where it's like a movement.
Yeah.
Those Get Home Safe kids, they had that shit on fucking lock, man. You know what I mean? It was like they were like the next cool kids coming up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That, like, they weren't into bottle popping at the clubs. They were into, like, the shitty fucking whatever bar, but it's fucking lit. And it's just like the real fucking, the cool kids are out. And like, they just had that. And there was just something that, like, was like polarizing, like, in the city, especially. I think it was just like good timing in terms of like, something could possibly happen. This could be the next thing. You know what I mean? That's cool. And I've always just been like, I gravitate to cool shit, like movements, right? Like, just movements, certain cool cultural things. And I think, like, again, and it was just one of those things that, I wanted to be a part of. And shout out my man Ricky Bobby, who was the first person to kind of really bring me to the attention of jazz at that time, even though I had heard about him years before, from another guy named JB. Biggest shouts out to him. So yeah, and then it was just, again, it was an interesting time. It was a great part. I unfortunately, we parted ways in 2019, but I in terms of the experience that I had, it was a really fun time, man.
I mean, I guess I'm just curious, like, what was it at that point, like, the crossroads for you guys to be like, we gotta part ways?
Yeah, I think it was an artist decision.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think, it was, and I'll say this, and I don't think I've ever really talked much about it. It kind of sort of came out of left for my partner and I, what I mean, who was managing at the time, who's still my good friend, like, meaning like who managed him with me. But I think it would just got to a point where I think the artist, like Jazz in this case, I think, he was at a point in his life where he felt he needed to, do certain, like, he needed a change, I guess, what I mean? And unfortunately, we were the recipients of that, you know what I mean? And
Sure.
It's just what it is. And, it was a difficult time. I'm not going to lie. It was because, you put all your time and your effort into something, and then like the next day it's kind of gone. And it wasn't like, I would never, at least in my opinion and my business partner's opinion, I don't think it was anything that was like, like hateful. It wasn't like, oh, like, you fucking, you ripped us off, or it was nothing like that. I think it was just a point where I felt, or he felt that, especially when he had moved, because at that point he was living here, and, he was, I guess, he just wanted to venture into different things. And, if there's one thing I'll always say is that, like, as much as it kind of hurt, at that time, to sort of see this thing sort of end, in my opinion, prematurely. Like, I felt like there was still, we were just, we're like getting somewhere, and it was great. That's why, and I'm older, so I'm wiser, and I can appreciate, like, sometimes you just gotta let things go, right? And but I felt it was one of those things that where you just gotta if that's the decision, you just kind of let it happen. You know what I mean? And that's just what it was. You know what I mean? And but rather than think about the negative, sort of like, oh fuck, like what it could, it's like, fuck. It's just what it is in terms of, like, I look back at it now and just say, like, it was a moment in my life that I feel shapes to where I am today. And if I keep it a buck, like, I'm good still. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we're still good. Like, I obviously, and thankfully, again, I've always had my job, which has also been super great. But that was, I guess, the thing. It was just literally, I think it came to a point where I think it just ran its course.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And sometimes you don't really necessarily understand it at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and I wish him all the luck. I mean, it's, we haven't spoken, but I will always, I feel like if, things happen for a reason, right? And it's just what it is, and you got to keep it pushing, man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, dude, then you turn the corner not long after that and you hit COVID, and it's kind of like every single artist in the entire world pretty much had to slam the brakes and be like, what the fuck is this? You know?
yeah,
So,
absolutely, man. So timing, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it just kind of just worked out that way. And, you know, again, and like I said, I've always been, to your point, it was like, it literally happened. I remember it was 2019, and then just like within less than a year, COVID happened. So, you know, it was like, in a way, it's kind of like, hey, man, it's just what it was. But
Yeah.
I still had my job, but you know, you learn, you live and you learn, man. And,
Yeah.
You know, and fucking management is a fucking very thankless job, though. I will say that.
It
you
is.
know what I mean? But it is what it is, and
Yeah.
and here we are. You know?
Yeah, I mean, music jobs supporting creative people are generally pretty thankless jobs. You know, and it's a twofold. I understand creative people are moving generally at like 10,000 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And so it's hard because you're constantly focused on how do you move forward? What are the things you need to do to move forward? Who are the people you need to expand with to move forward? What, you know, like the industry is changing. There's new platforms, new things, you know, all that shit. Like, I feel like we've had the craziest fucking obstacle course in like the last probably 15 years or something like that. Like from out of that transition of like Napster into like Twitter, Facebook,
Instagram.
Yeah.
It's
you know
like,
what I mean?
holy wow. Like TikTok now, it's like, what?
Yeah.
You know what
you
I
know,
mean?
and then obviously like the streaming platforms and like
Excuse me. Yeah.
you know, the mini eras we had from like blogs being kind of like the hot spot in 2007 to 2012, and then that transfer of promotional space and discovery and community and culture, or whatever you want to call it. You know, like it's so crazy to have to adapt at real-time speed with all that shit, and it's just exponentially getting faster and faster and faster and faster.
And that's one thing I also had to remind myself after, you know, because at first I was like, fuck, like we put so much time into this and it just fucking ended, right? You know what I mean? And it was a bit of a tough time, I'm not gonna lie, but
For sure.
but I also
Any
realized
relationship
too, it's
that.
like, you know, that's exactly what it is, right? You know, you put time in. It's like a breakup, right?
Yeah,
essentially.
totally.
But you know, I also do. And I think I learned this a little bit later. It's like I thought about it. Is like, you know, it's just like when all of this was happening, at least for jazz, like, you know, he was still relatively young.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you know, figuring it out himself. So I can't even be fucking mad at that when I think about it now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm like, I get it, right? You know, and like, and if that's kind of what he felt he had to do at the time, it's like, who am I to tell you no? Like, you know what I mean? And I think I was old enough to understand that, like, sometimes you just gotta let people make decisions and just let them do them. And, and that's just what it was. Right?
Yeah. I kind of want to ask some more things about that, but I also want to go back and like, I'm curious what your perspective was seeing like OVO and EXO from like pretty much inception. I mean, you were the heartbeat of the city, you know, like,
Thank you.
I mean, well, you were,
I mean,
you know,
I
realistically,
you're,
you're, I mean, if you're not directly responsible, you're indirectly responsible. Like you're 1 degree, probably max from all that stuff.
Yeah.
What's like, you know, I don't know. I mean, I know Canada's always had some pretty heavy hitter superstar artists that, in my opinion, kind of go under the radar when we look at like famous artists in history.
Oh yeah.
But
there's a few that people still don't know are Canadian.
Totally. You know, and I'm fine. Some of them I'll find out and be like, oh my God, I had no idea, you know, but you have now 2 within a few years of the biggest artists in the world launch out of that city.
Yeah.
And what's like, you know, kind of early days of that, it's like, you know, is that kind of the same atmosphere of like seeing some of that stuff bubble from small parties and small promo stuff and just things escalate? Were there any kind of pivotal moments in like the timelines there where you're just like, holy shit, this just blew over because of this thing? And, you know, now you're just seeing it just grow to like a new planet in the universe. Like those guys just took over everything.
Oh yeah, it's fucking dominate.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's first and foremost, it's fucking incredible to see it, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, it's not like, it's one thing to just blow up in your city or in your country, but when you're like
In the world.
global,
Yeah.
like it's like what? Like, but you know what? Here's what I'm gonna say. There's a fucking reason why. Because they're fucking incredible.
Yeah.
Like, it's hands down. Like, I don't give a fuck what anybody says. Like, you can fucking say what you want about whatever, about Drake or The Weeknd. Or, they're fucking incredible.
Yeah.
Like, I don't give a fuck what anybody says, right?
Yeah.
Like, the talent.
Yeah.
Like, Drake, like, and Drake is a student of the game as well. Like, I will outright say, like, this guy knows his shit. Like, never mind being talented. Okay, like, got bars all fucking day. But, like, I mean, he's also just incredibly like he, from at least in my in my experiences and seeing and having interacted, like, here's someone who actually like has studied the game, and he's also like, you know, he's also of the age where he comes from that world, you know what I mean, where he's seen, you know, that backpack era, especially in Toronto, because when you're college radio, like, that's all we had, you know what I mean, or just, so a lot of that you're hearing, like, you know, those more underground acts, like, you know, like Drake is probably works with every producer in the world, top guys. But you know what? Ask Drake about Dilla. He fucking knows.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, he's not like, you know what I mean? So there's a fucking reason where, like, I'm going to imagine, I'm not trying to speak on his behalf, but I could imagine that, like, some of those influences has obviously shaped him. You know what I mean? Like, you just, it's undeniable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think having the teams that they have behind them, like, and what's even interesting too, I think specifically, like, in my experience learning from some of the OVO camp, is like some of them, again, they didn't even, like, were coming from music. Like, there's like the fashion part of it, that their people on their teams come from that world, and it's just like lifestyle shit. And then it's just, again, and then just making, like, I think to them, from what I see, I think they just always knew, like, what they want, and they weren't going to let anybody get in the way of that. Like, not even Canada. Do you understand what I mean? Like, they just knew, and it's like, again, it was like, they fucking know what's cool. You know what I mean? And they knew who had to, like, how they wanted to put themselves out there. And then when you know that, and it's genuine, you know what you're doing, and then you're just fucking dope. And then on top, it's so dope that fucking, you know, America is fucking saying it's fucking dope. You know what I mean? And then when you get that co-signed by Wayne, like, who at that time, it's like the timing is fucking impeccable, man. Like, it's, but like, you know, I think, you know, I'm convinced, and I think, you know, this has been said before, like, I think there were people in Canada who had to be reminded how fucking dope Drake was.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
By Wayne. You know what I mean? Because, you know, we have that also, that crabs in a bucket mentality sometimes in Canada, where it's like, well, you locals, so, you know, or unless we see you in America, or we see you on BET, you ain't shit. Yeah. You know what I mean? But when you, and mind you, like, Drake was already doing that before he even got the cosign. Like, he has that. And just my opinion too, I think, and I could be wrong, but, you know, even having that experience doing as an actor, as a, you know, a child actor or whatnot, like, you know, like, you know, he's you get that training, that media training too. You know what I mean? And he's just kind of like, I think he knew how to just navigate that world too. And then he was just fucking dope. And so it's like, you could fucking dog him for being on a fucking show, fine. But, like, at the same time, I was just telling somebody else this, like, you know how big that show was outside of Canada? Yeah. You know what I mean? First and foremost. And then on top of that, he's fucking dope as shit. You know what I mean? And then you get someone like Wayne, like, who's like saying this guy's fucking dope at that time. Yeah. Like, when everyone's looking at Wayne, like, oh shit, it's like, fuck, Canada, you should be fucking embarrassed. Like, you know, like, I'm not trying to diss Canada, I'm just saying, right? You know what I mean? But yeah, so there's a reason. You know what I mean? And then it's kind of the same thing with like The Weeknd and the X, like, those guys, like, again, like, it's fucking talented. Like, that whole fucking House of Balloons, that whole trilogy shit, like that. And they didn't get any more Toronto than that. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, Torontonians know that sound. They know that fucking cold in the winter shit. Like, when it's fucking depressing outside, it's brick. Yeah. And it's just like, you're almost just like indoors and you're making that fucking vibey shit. Like, you know what I mean? And I think what was interesting about, I think, at least in my sort of what I've seen, in my opinion, with the XO stuff, is just like, that to me was like, EXO till we overdose or whatever it was. Like that was just that's so fucking like, yes, man, that is a Toronto fucking thing. You know what I mean? And it was just like super fucking like, I think a lot of people could like relate to that, especially downtown people, like downtown kids know what that is. You know what I mean? And that vibe. And then on top of it, it's like, and then you got Drake co-signing The Weeknd right at that time. And it's like, oh shit. Like it's just fucking, and I don't know, man. I think it just, and it just kind of did its thing. So there's that's not by fucking coincidence. It's because they're fucking incredibly talented, right? And that's why they're still around to this day. I don't give a fuck what anybody says. Yeah. Like, you know, there's a reason why they're still around because, you know, obviously, you know, because the fucking talent is there and they have smart people on their teams and I'm sure they've worked with some of different people to get to, you know what I mean, who have probably, they've learned a lot, you know what I mean, as figuring it all out, and to the point where like, you know, now they're fucking dominating, man, and they, you know, and they do their thing, you know what I mean, and they always still rep Toronto, you know what I mean, like fuck, you know what I mean, like that's just what it is. And the Drake thing is even crazier to me. I mean, it's both crazy, like I don't care what anybody says, but like
they're both crazy.
It's fucking unfucking believable. Like I'm still shocked because I'm just like, I played a little part in my little marketing over here, and I remember having meetings with Drake back in the days and saying this, but like I was like forget all that. Like I'm like, you know, like at our Raptors games, there's like Drake OVO nights. Like it's like, what the fuck? Like it's crazy, right? Like it's so incredible to see what these guys have done. And then, you know, and you know, the team members that I know that are still on the teams, like they never switched up. Like, you know what I mean? Like in terms of like, at least in my sort of, you know, experience with them. And like, I think that's important too, you know, and I've seen like a lot of the guys who have been with these people from day one. And that's very telling, you know what I mean? Like there's that loyalty part is there, you know what I mean? And they know who they've been with, who's been with them since day one. And at the same time, who's doing what.
Sure. Mm-hmm. So it was part of the reason why I wanted to hit this fork when you were talking about jazz, but even with those guys, what's like I know vaguely like the grant system supports a lot of like the new talent, you know, and I'm sure as you progress, you unlock higher levels of funding and, you know, ways you can help finance the beginnings of a career. Yeah. With guys like The Weeknd and Drake, like, are they going through a Universal Canada for a leg, and then are they jumping to American companies, or do those guys just jump right over and go into the States at that point?
Well, I know specifically like in their very early stages, like we would have carved out deals for them for Canada. Yeah. So for Canada, like specifically at Universal, and maybe not that many people know that they would have carved out deals for Canada, but I think that's also works because it's like, you know, yes, America, like hands down, that's where, you know, it's where it's bigger. That's where it all happens. But I think, you know, having that home label at the same time is important because, you know, it's like we also understand our market. You know what I mean? And we know what to do in our market. So I think in those early stages, I think definitely like, you know, the Canadian label definitely had a part in that for sure. You know what I mean? But it has just gone to this level now where it's just, it's like, I don't think they need any fucking labels really ultimately, right? Anymore, right? As we've seen, right? But I mean, that's one thing I have to also credit Canada for is like the government is are advocates of arts. Yeah, you know, so to the point that they offer these grant. We have an incredible sort of grant system that's been for a while now. You know what I mean? That to basically invest in Canadian talent. You know what I mean? But at the same time, it's not like anybody can get it. Like you got to still have your shit together. For sure. You know what I mean? But the fact that because a lot of people from the U.S. tell me like, I can't even imagine if they had that out here. You know what I mean? Like there's grants that go from like, for like the most independent first development act that's like, here's $1,500 just to get an EPK done. Yeah. To like tour fucking support at fucking $100,000. Yeah. You know what I mean? To like, you know, videos. Like, you know, we used to have this, you know, Much Fact or like was a thing where like video grants, like sometimes people used to be embarrassed. Oh, I don't want to look like that. I want to have that much back. No, fuck that. It's free money.
Yeah.
I can take it. You know what I mean? And it's incredible to see that to this day that, you know, Canada is very, very supportive of their artists in terms of helping them build and develop, and then obviously export them out. So,
Yeah. What do you think like the reason for that portion of it is, like to export them out? Because I feel like even more, you know, think about like that initial foundation. Like, as far as I know, I'm sure there's some form of grants here, but I know zero people that have had that support
right.
from starting as an artist in America. And obviously Toronto specifically, and I'm sure there's some other markets that I'm just not aware of, had fundamental like support of this entire new generation of artists. What prevents that from like the government growing with those people? Like, is it something that the government then can help work with the record label? Is it like I mean, I know the market obviously is much bigger in America, but it still seems like you guys have the ability. I don't know if it's like a border and, for lack of a better, like green card and restrictions on what you can accomplish being in Canada versus being signed to a label in America. But it seems like you guys have this epic foundational support, and then that kind of like helps launch people in phase one, and then they kind of just hop out and go to the American market, you know?
Yeah. I mean, and I'm sure there's different opinions about this, but I think a lot of it, going back to the grants, I mean, I think first, if you look dating back to when these grants started becoming it's like from way back. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So it's like, it's not like this just happened like recently. Like, you know, I remember like in the early 90s still you can apply for grants for your music videos, but that was just because we want to support Canadian talent. We want to build it here. You know what I mean? But also remember, think about it. I think a lot of times there were just, you know, we were mainly focused on Canada. You know what I mean? It's just like, we're gonna build it out of here, and to some degree we still do that for sure. But like, there was no like Spotify then. There's no, so maybe, and I can't speak because back then it might have been a different time, but it's like we weren't thinking about like what sales were going to be in America. You're thinking about your own market. So we're here supporting it out here, and remember the labels did quite well. You know what I mean? For like, and even in those days, just for stuff that was happening in Canada, you know. And then all of a sudden, when the, you know, the DSPs came around, and it's like borderless now, it's like, well, wow, the possibilities became bigger. But I think overall, I think the reality is that like a lot of artists too, it's perception, right? It's like, okay, I'm gonna reach a ceiling here in Canada, and I love Canada. Thank you. You've helped me get to like this part. How do I sort of level up more? And a lot of that just has to deal with like, well, in America, because not to say that we can't do a lot of that out of Canada, but at the same time, I think a lot of it looks at America because it's America. You know what I mean? It's like perception is reality. You know what I mean? So they look at it as like, well, that's where it's at. And those, like, you have to have those relationships out there. You have to be in the mix out there. You know what I mean? So, you know, you'll see a lot of artists that will probably want to be like, well, let me just go directly to America. And that's what happens sometimes. You know what I mean? That's just what it is. And of course, it's like, I get that at the same time. And it becomes challenging for even for Canadian labels. It's like, how do we compete against that? You know what I mean? And, you know, without having to get into the politics of all of that stuff, but I do know what you mean. Like, in terms of like, it's very, to look at it as like, okay, well, like we got you up to here, and then sometimes they're like, peace out, we're going, and that happens, you know what I mean? But I think at the same time too, it's just like, and the way the world works right now, people are just thinking like globally, you know, like in general. So
I mean, I also don't really know how it's structured. I imagine probably a majority land within the Universal umbrella in America. And then you're still basically parent company.
Correct.
Whoever I forgot owns Universal. but you're still kind of tied to that system.
So typically the way it would work is just like, depending, and like not to get into the semantics of how deal structures work, but essentially like, I mean, it's common that like if an act is signed out of Canada to a Canadian label, then, and depending on the way that structure is, whether it's like the complete worldwide rights are owned by the Canadian company, then, what we have is sort of like an intercompany sort of like licensing agreement that it's called the ICLA, I think is what we call it there. And so like, if another territory within the Universal family wants to pick it up, they can, right? Because it's like within the fam, right?
Sure.
You know what I mean? But Canada would probably still own the line share because we're the repertoire owner, so
right?
They say. But it's also very dependent on the type of deal that you sign. You know what I mean? So there's times where we'll sign the act completely out of Canada, and like meaning like we own the worldwide rights. It's signed here, we own it, and we get it to a level, and we call our family in America, and we're like, or whatever one of the labels, and we're like, hey, do you want to be our partner on this? And then they kind of come in and help with it. Or there's situations where we'll do joint ventures, where we right off the rip, we're doing it with America. You know what I mean? Right off the top. And it's those for the most part, like it also has to be, I think, also attractive enough for the Americans to be like, okay, well, if there's potential there, they'll want to get in on it too. You know what I mean? But it's also just a population thing, right? Like what is it? Canada's like the size of the state of California, right? So you're almost
population wise,
right? You know what I mean? So I get why there will be a lot of artists that will just want to go direct to America if they have that opportunity. Like if somebody blows up on TikTok, and like all the fucking labels are calling, chances are, again, perception is reality. So a lot of these acts might say, well, fuck, I'm gonna go with fucking Interscope or Def Jam because they're in America and I know them, right? But the reality is, I don't care what anybody says, I'm sure an American label will say this, that even if they were to do that, they want to make sure that it's that you're popping in your own city, in your own country. You know what I mean? And going back to what I was saying earlier, like Canada knows Canada. Yeah. Like we do. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's, and I think that's the line. You know what I mean? But here we are.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's a conversation I started to have more with Gavin and Addie when I went to Toronto for the first time and kind of had that realization of like, wow, you guys have the most pound for pound heavyweight people coming out of this city. Mm-hmm. Like from Drake and The Weeknd breaking it down and Bieber, kind of like opening everything. Mendes, yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like,
that's fucking crazy too.
Yeah. I would also say though, the infrastructure in Canada is not quite the same. It's not. I don't get it. It's just not. Like, there's a lot of that we lack in terms of specifically in the genres of hip hop and R&B, for example. Like, we don't have, like I said, we talked about this earlier, like we don't have like, how like here I come to LA, you have like 3-4 radio stations that are just dedicated to hip hop, R&B. Like, we don't have that.
Yeah.
You know
and
I mean?
Like the population that serves.
Exactly.
Here.
And then on top of that, like all the big sort of outlets are here. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like we don't have that back there. Right. So like we don't have late night television, like where you're seeing an act that's doing Fallon or that's doing Jimmy Kimmel or whatever it is, you know what I mean? Or the next thing, like we don't have that. Yeah. You know what I mean? We don't have that back home.
And at that point, like when you're looking to access those things, are those pretty much all just sewn up by major record labels? Like you have to have some form of affiliation
for it's relationships.
99% of a chance to go do any of that.
Look, I think at the end of the day, if your shit is getting to a level, like you'll figure it out, right? You know what I mean? But I think, from what I've seen, a lot of those, it's the relationships, right? So like, it only makes sense that the American labels are going to have those relationships because that's what they do. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like the publicist at an American label has the relationships with those people, those late night television, fucking the people at SNL or whatnot. Whereas like historically, like we mainly deal with Canada. Yeah. Do you understand what I mean? So it's like you want to get on the Canadian publications or the Canadian certain outlets, all day we got that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We'll do that, but again, it's also pretty limited, right?
Sure.
So that's, again, some of the challenges.
Sure. I mean, do you guys have you seen a lot of like the main person that comes to mind, and I don't know the full behind the scenes thing with any artist these days, but like a major independent artist movement, like for me the main person that comes to mind is Daniel Caesar.
Oh yeah.
As kind of like our quasi like Chance the Rapper level artist that just seemed to take it all the way to the end zone as an independent artist. Like that route, is that a route you're seeing open up more, or is it still like people are trying to play through labels? And
I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. I think if anybody prove that you can do it like that, Daniel's a perfect example of that. But I mean, we also saw where like certain DSPs were like, we're gonna go fucking balls out on this act, that we're the ones that are gonna break this. You know what I mean? And I don't think I'm like out of line by saying that I think that he got great support too from that didn't necessarily require a label. You know what I mean? So that helped, because that's also just the timing, right? You know what I mean? But I will also say that too, like, Daniel's also signed to a label now. You know what I mean? But
I haven't kept up with Chance if he's signed to a label, but I know at one point, I think it was before the big day, that started to also be like, oh, there's this relationship with Apple Music now starting to bloom. Right. Where you're like, okay, like it seems like you've had to do something, you know what I mean, in order to advance to that level of support from those companies. Because I can only imagine the amount of pressure that those companies receive from the major record labels for their top acts to receive, the top choice slots on every opportunity they can provide, because it's got to be so competitive.
Well, you know what? In Daniel's case, because I've known some of his team, especially the original sort of members, and then like
Matthew and
Jordan, right? You know what I mean? Big shout outs to them, and like.
And Franco.
And Franco. Yeah, when are we talking to Franco? Yeah, absolutely. I think like, but I think again, they're just entrepreneurs in themselves, right? Yeah. So naturally it was like
all-star talent.
Yeah, like I don't even think and I can't speak on their behalf. And Riley too, we got shout Riley.
Totally.
You know what I mean? Like,
of course.
I mean, I can't speak on their behalf, but I would imagine like for them, they're probably just focused on just trying to create great music and just like do what they had to do regardless if a label was going to call them or not. You know what I mean? And I think again, going back to like word of mouth, and like people just gravitated to that shit. You know what I mean? And it was different. The timing, it was just like, it was at a time where maybe like I never heard anything like that. You know what I mean? Like whether it was even out here in America, I didn't hear no shit like that. You know what I mean?
He walks the line creatively of somebody like Frank Ocean, where it's obscure enough, like it's similar enough that you can feel that connection to it, but it's different enough that
it's like you're curious, right? It's like fuck, right? And it's just fucking dope. You know what I mean? And even like in those, like I remember those early times, and I got to shout out my man Osei Anthony, who was like also just like, he was like having the blog. He was just like, he was like that guy who just knew how to like just be in front of stuff early. You know what I mean? And I think it's like it was like the perfect storm again, where it was just like there's this artist who's doing something that sounds different. It has this entrepreneurial spirit about it. And then most of all, like, remember, like, Jordan and Matthew, like, at least from, like, I don't, like, these are fucking music guys.
Oh,
like, like, real musicianship.
Yeah,
you know
what I
100%.
Mean?
And I think that also will always carry something.
100%.
You know what I mean? And then, of course, the circles, like, if, like, like, the Bad Not Goods, like, like, those groups that were in there early, like, around that circle, you know what I mean? And it was just, like, it's like, again, it was a movement, you know what I mean? And it was, like, I think it just played itself out the way it was supposed to be played out. Like, I don't think like, and I can't speak for them, but like, I'm imagining they probably got all kinds of offers and stuff like that. But I think if it was what they felt was what they needed to do was just kind of stay the course and do what they're like. If it ain't broke, why fix it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Totally. And I think it was just that's just what they did. You know what I mean? And it worked, you know what I mean? And Whether they felt they needed a label at that time versus whether they need one now is a whole other thing. But at the end of the day, it's like, fuck, here we are, man. And Daniel's that's just a great fucking example because he's definitely. Yeah, it was just like, when you look at it, it was like, there was no label behind that at all. It was like everybody wanted it.
And it was such a small team.
It's such a small team. You know what I mean? And they really built that shit out of Canada. Like, they did. Like, I mean, it was there. And, like, shout out my man Tom Kemp, who's an agent back home. And I believe he still represents. I think he does, Tom. But, like, he was there on the ground early, getting them in the right places. And you know, again, the grant system.
Yeah.
They utilized that, you know what I mean? And that helped them a lot to get to the next place. And then that coupled with just like smart fucking people on the team being strategic and planning and being like, you know, and like not fucking doing anything that they didn't want to do.
Yeah.
And then I think it just works out.
What's it like when you are native in Canada, going through the industry, earning money and having to pay like your taxes and like, and then also coming to America and having to then, I'm assuming, pay taxes in both countries? Like, that's got to be pretty insane.
Yeah, and I'm not the person to ask because I don't know how that probably would work, right? But I mean, it has to be something like, or unless there's some kind of, I don't even know how it works. If there's some sort of blanket thing that says it works, because I can't. I mean, maybe they're getting dinged twice, right? You know what I mean? But I don't know. I literally don't know.
Yeah, just curious because I feel like that's a big one.
I feel like I should know that, but I don't.
Yeah, just because I've always kind of heard, and I don't, you know, it's something as a curious person and student of the world. Yeah, I'm looking at where can I move outside of America, and it starts to become, well, what do other governments offer? What kind of taxes do you pay? You know, in Canada, I feel like it's always been like the 45 or 55% bracket. Yeah, you know, so I just think about, well, shit, if you're doing that on top of going to America, which is like another 35-ish percent.
There goes half your money.
You know, like
more than half.
Yeah, you know, so it's just, I don't know how that technically works. So I was just curious, but
I actually never thought about that when you think about it, but interesting to know. I mean, either way, it looks like they're fine, right? They chill and take it. You know what I mean?
For sure. So what was it like for you and the Canadian music label world going into COVID?
So I remember like the day that we're locked down. It was fucking crazy because, funny, and I'm not trying to stump, but I was at this like exclusive so Nick Nurse, who's the head coach he's the coach of the Raptors, he had some like charity fundraising event, and I remember it. We were at this thing. It was like you know, some of the staff from the label were invited to this thing, and I remember, and it's funny because my cousin actually works for Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment, which the Raptors are part of and stuff like that. And I forgot what it was, but it was like there was the rumor. This is at the event. Okay, so now we're at this event. You know, people are obviously shaking hands, tapping each other up, right? Like whatever. And then this was where it was announced that, I don't know how it was, but remember, this is like where the Raptors were playing. Was it like, what was that player's name? But the Raptors were playing a team, and that was like the first case of like COVID that happened. And then it was kind of like, it was announced like on the news, like it was like going on Twitter feeds that like so-and-so from the NBA, I forgot what fuck was it? Rudy
Gobert, yeah.
Right.
I didn't know if it was that moment, but yeah, because I grew up Jazz fan, so that was like kind of the...
Right, and it was like him or something like that. But like the last team they played were the Raptors.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
So we're all sitting, and this is on Twitter, and meanwhile, like, the Raptors are sitting fucking in the room, right? And so everyone is, like, slowly fading out of the room, right? And it's all going crazy. And they're not going to fucking announce this on the mic at the fucking charity event of all places. But it was kind of like, oh, damn, like, and so people was like, I guess I'm not going to stay for dessert today, you know what I mean? But in terms of the limbo, so I remember that, because I remember that day, that it was like, oh shit, because it was a whole thing. It was like the NBA and they're shutting everything down. Like there's going to be no more games. And it was like, I remember that because I was like, the fucking team that they just fucking played, which was the Raptors, they're fucking sitting right over there because it was a thing. But in terms of like, here's what I gotta say, and I can speak specifically for Universal Music Canada. I'm like, man, like we were like, just like miraculously, we were like untouched, man. Like meaning like obviously like meaning like I saw other people in the music business really like lose jobs and stuff like that, and shout out to Universal Music Group and Universal Music Canada specifically, because that's where I can comment on, is that, you know, like we luckily it didn't affect too many people in terms of losing jobs, and how they were able to sort of adapt and just like, okay, we're working from home. Like literally that was the last time. Then we never came back for 2 years, like in office. And it was like, and I really got a hats off to Universal Canada at that time, because during this whole thing, we were in the process of moving to a new building that we had built from the ground up. Like it was like they built a creative campus is what we call it, but it really is, right?
Yeah,
like,
I saw it when I was there.
It's fucking beautiful.
Yeah, like the showroom, performance room,
yeah,
the studio.
Oh, yeah. So you've seen it,
yeah.
right? Like, I mean, and especially compared to the office that we had before, which is like, we didn't have that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was like, it was just this crazy, like how we were able to maneuver all of that within the pandemic of having to stay home, with like all of our shit was still at the old office, and we were supposed to move into this new office. Everything's delayed. So it was gracefully handled. I'm sure it was fucking hectic as shit, like for the people who were directly involved in it. But as far as like how we handled it there, you know, I mean, the Zoom became the thing, right? It was like, damn, that was a whole thing. But I felt like, you know, I'm really, really thankful and blessed that, like, you know, our part of the business didn't really get touched. And it was like, it was interesting because it was like people were still making music, but there was obviously no touring.
Yeah.
And then people had to get creative how to create the content, because you couldn't do video shoots, so we couldn't like be in groups.
Yeah.
I remember there was a time where we were buying studio equipment for our artists so they can record from home, and then buying tutorials for some of them to learn how to record themselves. And then it became things where we were learning through Zoom how to have an engineer explain, like, so it was like this whole like trying to figure it out shit. But yeah, it was fucking interesting, because then at one point you're just like thinking like, how the fuck are we gonna do all of this? But we did. And then there was that whole time where, like, remember, people were like, people's listening habits changed all of a sudden. Like nobody was listening to hype lit shit. Everyone was listening to like legacy old classic shit. Like, you know what I mean? It was like all these different things. So
yeah,
it was interesting, you know what I mean? If I kept it a buck. But, and it's funny because it, like, and I think about it, like, we actually only moved into our new office last April, like of last year, like physically.
Yeah.
But we yet at the same time managed to move into a brand new office, move all of our shit from there, like, it was a whole thing, you know? So it wasn't exactly, it was just a lot of adapting. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like the rest of the world did, you know what I mean? But yeah, man, it's funny, surprisingly, like, and I thought about that because, like, I know people who just, unfortunately, like, there's people who've lost lives in general. So that's a whole fucking thing. Crazy. And then just people who, like, literally, like, their careers overnight flipped.
Yeah.
Like, agents, promoters, like, no fucking shows. Like, what's up? And then remember, there's like, well, we think that shows are gonna probably come back at this time, and like people are like,
stop start.
So yeah, and now it's like, you think about it, it's like, what, like 3 years almost now. You know what I mean? And Toronto specifically was like the last city to like open up. Like, we were on lockdown for a while, like for real. Like, yeah. And then in certain parts of like Canada, like Montreal, they even had like fucking curfews. You know what I mean? So it's kind of interesting, man. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. But again, as I always say, again, here we are, man.
Yeah.
Keep it pushing. So shout outs to like whole Universal Music Group and Universal Music Canada for like weathering that storm. You know what I mean?
So pushing through that whole experience, and like, what are you seeing now? As we come out of the tunnel.
Yeah.
From COVID, and kind of like, is that reopen? Sign new acts, get new people in the building.
Yeah.
Like, how does that kind of revert to some degree back to business as usual? We're trying to rebloom, or is it a new focus? How are you kind of reintroducing, coming into
I think it's made us
2023?
stronger, if I'm being honest. Like, I feel like, now it's given us this sort of like, all right, let's fucking like look what we survived, look what we went through, and everybody, don't ever take that shit for fucking, you know what I mean, for granted. But I think it's also built this sort of like, I think it's also brought a lot of people closer, you know what I mean? But in terms of us as a company, like, from what I'm seeing, it's like, fuck, man, it's like, let's fucking go, you know what I mean? And and so I mean, we're signing, of course, and it's funny because like we were always signing still, even although like we were limited in what we can do, but we were being obviously strategic in what we were like, I'm sure how we were, budgets and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But I think in terms of like where we are today, it's like, nah, man, it's like, it's fucking, let's keep it going, right? And not like so much like business as usual, but like I think, like, let's be smarter, let's figure out how to like navigate, and like, but I do feel like this sense of like, at least there, I could see that they're really, really just kind of like, they're going for it, man. And they're just happy to be out of that. And it's like, be thankful that we're all still fucking working, man. And now, so like, let's fucking crush it.
Yeah. So you've been through promoting parties, DJing.
Yeah. Dime bag selling at the Olive Garden.
Dime bag selling at the Hard Knock Life Tour.
Yeah.
Growing into like a serious marketing promotion role. Starting A&R work, picking up an artist, managing an artist, signing that artist, losing that artist, going through COVID, all that experience. And what do you look forward to going forward? Is it still like, I want to learn another avenue of the industry, or is it like, what's exciting at this point?
I was thinking of learning a little bit more about origami. No, there's a saying they say, when you're going through hell, you keep going, right? You know what I mean? And I think for me, I always say I'm so fucking grateful. I'm so thankful that I've been able to do it this long.
Yeah.
I'm excited for what the next, 5 to 10 years look like, and I don't even know if I know necessarily yet what that is,
Sure.
right? I just know that like I feel like, I don't know, man, like I feel I've learned so much over this time, but I'm fucking like, I still want to learn, man. Like I'm still hungry. Like I really am still hungry. Like I surround myself with these younger generation, and I'm like, I'm learning, man. I'm not afraid. I'm never that guy. I mean, you ask anybody who knows me, I hope, like they feel the same way, but like, I never really felt like I was the person who had to be like, yo, I'm the fucking OG, so this is how it's going to be. Like, nah, man, I am constantly trying to learn, man. And like, who fucking knows like what that is? But I know that like, for me, I still feel like I got a lot more in me, I think the label side of things is obviously something that is like, I've spent almost my natural born life in the sort of working in that part of it. But, I just want to, like I said, I want to surround myself with like these younger artists, creatives, and just in general. And more importantly, man, again, I always say this, I just want to be in the mix, Nick, man. Like back home, I one of the things that really for me that I pride myself on, and I actually do it with Addie. Addie's my partner and one of my partners in it. I do a night. It's an industry mixer night that I feel was much needed in Toronto, specifically, and it's called YSK. It stands for You Should Know. And what it is, it's a bi-weekly industry mixer that from 7 to 11 p.m. It's literally like from 7. I do not advertise it on socials. It gets advertised on socials after the fact because people are whatever,
sure,
posting from it. But really what I set it up for with a group of friends, one being Addie, who you know, Chris Martin, another gentleman by Photo Will, and my man Jermaine Clayton. So we collectively have this night, and what it was is just a night for all these younger creatives, and not necessarily have to be in music, but just people who are just doing dope shit to come to a night that's free. It's invite only, right? But you have to hear about it. It's a mandatory RSVP, and even like you don't RSVP, I'm gonna let you in, right? You know what I mean? But we set it up because what I wanted to do was I wanted to be constantly surrounded by like the younger generation of kids coming up that may not necessarily have opportunities to meet other people, or better yet, some of the older cats in the music industry, like from my era. Matter of fact, and I say this to everyone, I'm like, I actually, for me at least, one of the reasons why I was really interested in doing it is because I wanted to show all the old heads at the labels to be like, you need to pay attention to these young kids, because these are the fucking young kids who are going to run the shit or possibly take your fucking job in the next fucking 5 years or 10 years if you don't fucking pay attention. And for me, personally, I just wanted to be around this fucking next generation so I can empower and learn and at the same time, like, just be in the mix again.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And these are the cats that are going to be doing it. You know what I mean? And so what's interesting about the night is that every event that we have, which is bi-weekly, like I said, we usually have it hosted by an organization or a night with an artist that will perform, that's promoting. And we're super selective as to who we kind of choose to have it host. But it really literally started as an opportunity, as a community thing to promote platforms or promote artists. And the idea is that when you come to that event, you're going to walk out having learned something or met someone. I don't give a fuck. I always say this and I really mean it. It's not a party. It is a party, but it's not. Like, we did it from the time so that way, because it happens on Tuesday nights. So it starts early enough so that way, like, it's not too late. But it ends so that way, if you want to go home because you have to be up in the morning, it's 11, you're home before midnight. Or if you want to fucking turn up and go to a party, you can still have time to go to the club, right? Yeah. But what you will walk out of that thing is you'll walk out meeting somebody, or you'll walk out having made some sort of connection or learned something about something, And that's what we do it for. So again, it's paying it forward to the next generation. And I'm fucking excited. And now it's kind of grown into this fucking thing that, like, people are now asking how they can either host or be a part of it or just be invited. And we do it. And it's paid for. It's word of mouth, right? Going back to that. So it's kind of full circle in this weird way for me, man. It's fucking weird, but it's fucking dope at the same time. And, we've had everybody from excuse me, like, we'll have like artist performer, we'll have like some of the platforms. Like, we had one night that was dedicated for like women in the music industry. So we had like some of the sort of topics, female executives from like TikTok, from Warner Music to like, Amazon, that would like host the night. And we have, you name it, like just different things that we've had, where people are just and it's funny because and I don't want to spoil it yet, but we do have some really incredible programming everyone's asking when's it starting, because we took a break because the brick winters, like the winters are just too cold, so we took a break. But we're starting up in the next month again, and we have some incredible programming that's going to happen. But we've just had like everyone, like I said, just different people come in, and a lot of it's more just like and the feed. Had you asked me when we first started this in the summer of last year, it was like June when we first started it, we didn't know that it would last this long. Yeah. But the demand was there. And the thing is, for us, like, I don't care if it's 50 people there, 5 people there, or 500 people in there. Yeah. And believe me, we've had that. Yeah. We've had it where there's fucking jam. You can't get in because it's too crowded, to like, there's nights where it's a little bit slower. But that's not what it's about. Like, it's about it's networking, right? Yeah. And it's teaching some of these younger kids that don't fucking understand the importance of networking. You know what I mean? Like, and I tell this to these kids coming up, I'm like, or for anybody, man, it's 3 things, man. You got to fucking show up. You know what I mean? Because you got to do the work. You have to, right? And then I always say this, and people in the room here are going to know this, is that just say please and say thank you, man, and you'll be all right, man. That's it, man. That's it. It's fucking simple, man. That's it.
I couldn't agree more, man. That's a fucking beautiful way to end it, but I gotta just have you run through from the titles standpoint where you started to where you are currently, from street team to...
Yeah. I don't think I even had a fucking title back then. I mean, it's crazy. Titles, that's another thing. Like, titles don't really faze me, man. Like, I don't really fucking... To me personally, I mean, hey, it's cool. So my title's director of A&R, but like I'm just Ives, man. That's really what it is. Like, I'm just fucking Ives. Like, it's really not that serious to me, man. Like,
Sure.
I'm like,
it's just amazing to hear the lineage and the path you've been on to now is so fucking cool, dude.
I appreciate that, man. I'm super, like, listen, man, if it wasn't for the people who came before me that sort of gave me opportunities, or at least that people that inspired me, like, I just, but I fucking work hard, man. I play harder, man, but I show up and I always keep my fucking word, man, straight up. Like, that's just what it is, right? And, like, what you give is what you get, so to say. And, and I've always just, like, again, I'm like, I'm a student of the game still. I don't care. Like, you know what I mean? And I'm always going to be that. And I always want to just be able to kind of give back to the next generation, because that's just what it is. Pay it forward, man. Like, it sounds cliche, but it's fucking true, man. And, like, this is the shit that, like, kind of, like, I'm so blessed, man, to be doing this. Like, I say this, and I was saying this to to an artist I work with, my man King Croft. I told him, I'm like, yo, bro, like, I don't fucking work. I don't get a fucking job if it's not for artists like you, or producers, like, like my man Harrison. It's like producers like him, my man King Croft, and all the other artists that I work with. I don't fucking get to work if it's not for you guys.
Yeah.
So this is what it is, man. And, like, I'm just I just want to ride this out, man. Let's go. And my other last piece of advice to anybody's coming up, man, like, just do it because you love it, man. You know what I mean? Like, do it because you love it, man. That's what it is. If you're doing it, do it for the right reasons, man. And if you're passionate about something, man, just fucking keep at it, man. And there's somehow it just works out,
Yeah.
And fucking tell the truth, man. Keep it pushing. That's it.
It really is. Before we kill it, I gotta just give Addy the biggest fucking shout out in the world for being the best fucking human. One of my favorite people I've ever met.
Let me tell you about Addy first, real quick, okay? Because I gotta shout this guy, Addy Papa, who I was just speaking to yesterday. This is him, rich kid, junior, just like that circle. Gav, all those guys, like guys that there's a reason why we speak so highly about them. Why? Because they're just fucking genuinely fucking nice fucking human beings.
Yeah.
Hard fucking workers. And Addy, because you brought up Addy, like, Addy always says, like, oh, you're like a mentor to me, like, you're like big bro. And I'm like, yo, Addy, thank you. But, like, he has no fucking clue, like, how inspired I am from, like, because I watch Addy, like, hustle. Like, I've seen this guy hustle, like, before Riot Club, all that shit. Like, and he's just so, like, he's super connected. He's just super smart, and he just keeps it a buck, man. Like, he's not gonna sugarcoat the shit, you know what I mean? And then it's like, and you just respect people like that, and but he's also a good listener, you know what I mean? Like, I've met so many people through Addy.
Yeah,
like, I've met a lot of people here through Addy.
Me too.
You know what I mean? Like, what? Like,
dozens. Like, literally dozens.
Like, literally dozens from, like, people. Like, Addy yesterday was sending me a fucking text, like, first of all, I didn't even fucking know Addy. I think he's coming here, right? I think he's coming here, like, in the next day or so. He's coming out here. Addy's fucking sending me fucking, like, invites to parties that I'm like, Addy, like, how the fuck do you even know I'm here? For a sec, or like, you don't have to do that, Addy, but that's Addy. You know what I mean? And he's just, and he's fucking, and it's the Filipino thing, right? So it's like, so that part counts for a thing, and I think he appreciates my sick sense of humor, you know what I mean? So he gets extra points on that. But no, Addy's is one of those guys who is just, he's a fucking guys like Gav, and there's a lot of other people I can name, but so please, if I didn't name it, I'm just gonna say it's to everybody. But, like, Addy in our city, he has paved the way for a lot of shit.
Yeah.
Like, more than he gets credit for.
Yeah.
And he's fucking humble as shit. Yeah. Like, he doesn't he's not that guy. Like, he's just not. And he just kind of, like, you know, he just does it, and it's just like, and it's effortless, bro. Like, you know what I mean? And he's a great guy, and I'm lucky to be able to kind of, like I said, work with him on this YSK night that I do. And like, you know, he never fucking, I think the last time I was here, which is like a few months back, just before the new year, I was with him here. You know what I mean? And he was, once again, it's like, he's the fucking man. He knows his shit, you know? And
Dude, when I was there,
and he keeps it real. He'll just fucking tell you what it is.
when I was there last August, he saved my ass because I got some weird Airbnb mix up with the place I was trying to stay at. So I ended up staying with him.
Yep.
He picked me. Him and Junior
In the
picked
slides.
me up. Yeah, him and Junior picked me up, and that's literally what I was gonna say. The only person I've ever seen in my entire life go to the club every time
And can get in without socks.
and is walking
In
slides in basketball shorts.
Yeah, that's it.
And we walk in, and like Cardinal's running the night and shouts him out. You know, like literally, he just.
Well, he was fucking doing whatchamacallit, Donovan's Yard.
Yeah.
And shout out to Drew Bird and all that, because I actually met Drew Bird through Addy.
Yeah.
Like, again, and you know, like from what they're doing, that they were doing the fucking Shaba fucking, you know, Donovan's Yard parties in Toronto.
Yeah.
Caravana weekend.
Yeah. That was what I was
it was
there for. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So shout out to Addy, man. That's my fucking dude, man. For real.
Thank you, man. This is a fucking treat. I'm so happy we got to do this.
Thank you for having me, man. Thank
Yeah.
you for having
Absolutely.
me. I appreciate you, man. And you know what? Like, where's the camera? Shout out to you, Nick, because at Truth Studios, because, you know, I have to say this, man. Like, my first sort of like trips with, like I said, in those days with Jazz and the earlys where we were like really kind of like starting to really plant our feet in here, you really opened your doors for me and for everything that I was involved in. And like, you know, I'm sure a lot of people who have kind of been in and out of these doors, you know what I mean, know this. And, you know, and like, even when, you know, you had the storefront, remember, like, whatever. And I remember, like, you were just always super welcoming. There's the shit that you do right to this day, and the Polaroids, right? You know what I mean? Like, I remember even when I walked in, I'm still fucking looking at everything, and I've seen it grow, and it's a real, it's a testament to how much you mean to a lot of people, man. So congrats, man, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate you, boss.
Thank you, man.
No, seriously, real talks. I fucking called this dude like a day ago. He didn't fucking even know I was coming here, and I was just like, Nick, I'm in the fucking city. I'm with this incredibly talented artist named King Krupp that I'm going to be working with. We'll need a studio. It was like within minutes. You're like, yep, got it, ready to go. And of course, here we are. And shout outs to Gav as well, who had also said, make sure you talk to me. So, and he also sends his love.
Yeah, my two favorite fucking people, man.
That's
Gavin,
it, man.
I'm so happy I've been able to regrow my relationship with Gavin, because between him and Addy, and obviously you're an extension of that, but those two guys I talk to regularly, and I mean, both of their life stories and
man.
navigation through what they've put up
Yeah.
is like the two probably most interesting. Like Gavin's work with the city of Toronto,
it's
like
a fucking whole other level, right? People have no, like, I mean, people know, but people have no idea, like the contributions, and from the remix project to like the early sort of beginning days of how that all started.
We did a podcast episode, and he walked through the whole thing, and I literally had my jaw on the floor, and I tell people all the time, like, man,
I see
that's gotta be
visions,
my
man.
favorite. Yeah.
Get money, make change, man. Let's go. Right? Trust me, man. I remember being in some of those early meetings too when he was just getting that started. And, you know, he's an Etobicoke kid, for those who know, man. He's from the West End, man. And he knows his shit, man. And he's still doing his thing, man. And he's managing another talented artist named Nanso Amadi. And he's got his Quietest Kept stuff and public records who also, you know, had, you know, we've, you know, that gets distributed through Cadence/Universal. So he's very much kicking it. And it's actually, he told me today it's his son Idris's birthday today.
Oh shit!
And he's a fucking dad. What the fuck? Like, that was a whole thing. I was like, Dad, I remember when you were like just not a dad. You know what I mean? So,
what a treat, dude. Thank you,
my guy.
Yeah,
I appreciate you, man.
Hey, man, likewise,
my man. Let's do it. Cool.
That was fucking awesome.
You good? Sorry. You guys are like, yo, I gotta take a piss. I can't get up or something, man. Sorry, man. Shit.
I feel like I just watched a documentary.